Chapter 1198. It was impossible to find his true body in Luo-fan with such precision. Faced with this situation, the air hostess couldn't help but frown and was caught in a dilemma. "Madam, since we don't know where Master is and we can't contact his main body, why don't we leave this place and go sightseeing in the universe?" Seeing the frown on the Space Maiden's face, the creation god boy was overjoyed and suggested. When the air hostess heard that, she forcefully rubbed her head and said, "All you think about is playing. Even though I haven't been here for a long time, I know that the continent in front of us contains extremely profound cultivation mysteries. If I can comprehend it, I'll definitely be able to obtain great benefits and make great progress in my cultivation. You had such a great opportunity, but you didn't even think about grabbing it. You just wanted to play with it. If that's the case, when will you be able to control your own body?" After being scolded by the air hostess, the boy creation god couldn't help but become dispirited. He looked like he had no spirit at all as he muttered, "I'm just a magic treasure anyway. What's the use of controlling my own body? Won't it be fine with Master and Madam here?" The air hostess couldn't help but be slightly stunned after hearing that. She didn't expect that the spirit creation boy, who looked like a naughty child, actually had his own reasonable theory. Moreover, this theory sounded so bitter. She sighed and said, "Even though you're just a magic treasure, did your master and I really treat you as an ordinary magic treasure? Your master set up a space-time formation for you so that you could cultivate independently from a celestial device to a Tau Master level magic weapon today. Now, you can transform yourself into billions of incarnations and play around in the universe. Have you ever seen anyone treat a magic weapon like this? Although I don't, I'm still a magic treasure." The boy of creation god's eyes lit up, but then his expression turned gloomy. "Silly child, your master has already reached an extremely high realm where he doesn't need external help. What does he need magic treasures for? How could he have refined you just for a magic treasure? So your essence, in fact, it's just a life that exists in the form of a magic treasure. How is it different from me? If you continue to have such an attitude, how can you live up to the expectations of your master? How can you face yourself?" said the air maiden gently. Hearing this, boy creation god's eyes instantly turned red, and his mouth was puckered. He nodded with difficulty and said, "And obviously." She was deeply moved by the air hostess's words. She finally recognized her previous mistakes and established a firm belief in self-improvement. Seeing boy creation spirit like this, the air hostess couldn't help but smile. She hugged her and gently stroked her back. At this moment, Luo-fan, who was constantly striding forward in the void but appeared to be walking on the spot, suddenly changed his expression and broke away from the state of being washed backward by the river. So it's been more than 10,000 years. His eyes were a little dazed. Staying here for 10,000 years was not part of his plan. After all, when he told the air hostess about it, he had already told him to be prepared. However, doesn't it matter where you cultivate? It's just entering the demon realm. For me, it's just cultivation. If that's the case, what's the difference between gaining something here and entering the demon realm? He thought to himself. With a thought, he instantly scanned the entire universe. Such a big change has happened. It seems that they have completed their mission quite well. With a thought, he instantly knew all the changes that were happening in the entire universe. An inexplicable smile appeared on his face. After more than 10,000 years of development, the current universe had been completely divided into two levels. In the territory occupied by the technology camp, a technological civilization had been developed. There was no trace of the cultivation civilization there. In the vast territory of the cultivation camp, at this moment, it looked like a cultivation universe. In these territories, almost all traces of the technological civilization had disappeared. All the technological products had been replaced by the tools refined by the cultivation civilization. Spaceships, flying cars, artificial intelligence, and so on had been replaced by the tools refined by the cultivation civilization. The internet and all sorts of other things had all been transformed into something refined by the cultivation civilization. Because of these changes, although there were no technological products in the cultivation camp's territory, the quality of life of all living creatures was not weakened at all compared to before. Moreover, compared to the time when technological products still existed, the cultivation atmosphere in these areas was already stronger than imagined. Although it had only been developed for tens of thousands of years, there were countless galaxies and galaxies in the cultivation camp. The technological civilization of tens of thousands of years ago had already become an ancient legend. What they were pursuing now was transcendence, cultivation, and longevity. Such changes caused the number of cultivators in countless galaxies to increase by hundreds of millions of times. From time to time, the light of cultivators would cut through the void in the entire universe. From time to time, clouds of tribulation would cover the entire galaxy. From time to time, cultivators would become immortals, and from time to time, there would be fluctuations from battles between powerful beings. Everything looked exactly like a cultivation universe. The atmosphere of cultivation here was even more intense than that of the universe on Earth. Things had changed considerably in the technological faction as well. Not a single trace of the cultivation civilization could be found there. The power of living beings in the many galaxies within the technological faction was greatly restricted. If living beings wished to live forever, they could only achieve it by altering their bodies. Any cultivator, even if they had obtained longevity and achieved immortality in the cultivation camp, would instantly be reduced to a mortal after entering the territory of the technological civilization. All of their power would be restricted by the fundamental laws of the universe. If they stayed in this territory for a long time, they might even die of old age. This polarization made the entire universe seem so strange and inexplicable at this moment. Luo Fan's perception was extremely powerful, and his insight ability was beyond imagination. In an instant, he completely grasped all the details of the world-shaking war that had occurred over 10,000 years ago. He also completely understood how the entire universe had become like it was today and how such a polarization had occurred. At the same time, he also discovered things that the countless heavenly gods did not understand, and sensed countless details that they could not grasp. The entire universe was filled with it. Although the strength of the aura of the demon realm was not much different from before, its distribution was quite different from before. At this moment, the entire universe was filled with the aura of the demon realm in the direction of the technological civilization. It was many times stronger than before, and it had almost reached the level where it could be detected by technological means. In the area of the cultivation camp, the aura of the demon realm, it was so thin that it was almost non-existent. In such a state, it was as if the aura of all the demon realm in the entire universe had condensed into the technological civilization, which was less than 1/10,000th of the entire universe. The demon realm is definitely a cultivation world, and there are even sages there. It obviously can't be a technological world. Why is the condensation of the aura of the demon realm making the universe take the path of a technological civilization instead of rejecting cultivation? Why is this? As Luo Fan sensed the changes in the aura of the demon realm, he could not help but have such doubts in his mind. Such doubts. He could not make heads or tails of it. It was as if the smell of a delicious dish of food was actually rejecting other food, turning other food into poison. It was unbelievable. Perhaps this is because the cultivation system in the demon realm is completely different from the cultivation system I spread, and they even reject each other to the extreme. In contrast, the technological civilization is more suitable for the cultivation system of the demon realm. Luo Fan's thinking ability was very strong. In the blink of an eye, he found a seemingly reasonable explanation for this situation. If that's the case, then it's interesting. What kind of cultivation system would reject the orthodox cultivation system like this? The doubts on Luo Fan's face gradually disappeared. It was replaced by a smile, as if he had found something interesting. However, at this time, all the answers were just guesses. Unless Luo Fan personally grasped the cultivation system of the demon realm, it would only be an illusory castle in the air. There was no practical meaning at all. After thinking for a while, he let this anomaly go. He turned around and looked in the direction of the edge of the whirlpool. Then, he raised his hands and grabbed the void. His hands trembled slightly, and he directly displayed the method that appeared in the rune that looked like a mirror. In a trance, his hands seemed to be integrated into the whirlpool and the whole world. Such hands, they were not affected by the power of the whirlpool that could even isolate the mysterious connection between the original body and the incarnations. They explored through the vast and boundless whirlpool and directly came to the place where Air Maiden, Divine Creation Boy, and the others were, and all of them were wrapped up. Then they shrank slightly and brought all of them directly through the obstruction of the whirlpool. They came to a place not far away from him, and all of them landed. Obviously, it was impossible for them not to feel such a change. After the incarnations of Air Maiden and Divine Creation Boy came here, they instantly re-established the connection with their respective original bodies. They directly went into Luo Fan's body and reintegrated with their original bodies. After the integration, their original bodies all woke up. With a slight sway, they appeared outside of Luo Fan's body and revealed the figures of two beautiful women, one big and one small. At this time, the Kami and the others were slightly stunned. The method that Luo Fan displayed was completely beyond the scope of their understanding. In their minds, they were originally immersed in the boundless mysteries of cultivation, but all of a sudden, their vision darkened and brightened, and they appeared in a strange world. In front of their eyes, the senior immortal that they wanted to meet even in their dreams appeared. This change made all of them stunned in an instant. Greetings, immortal elder. However, they quickly reacted and kowtowed one after another while greeting. Among these people, Sheng was also one of them. Compared to the Kami and the others, Sheng's cultivation level was somewhat lower. However, he was extremely powerful, and his reaction speed was also slightly faster than the others. Thus, he was the first to react. Compared to tens of thousands of years ago, the holiness at this moment was even more pious. The faint arrogance that he had in the past had already disappeared without a trace. His bow was a gesture of his heart submitting to the Divine Lord. There was no longer any trace of reluctance. As the saying goes, the more you know, the more you realize your own ignorance. Sheng was like that at this moment. In the past, when he had just stepped on the path of cultivation, he had controlled the strongest superpower in the universe for tens of billions of years. Although he knew how powerful Luo Fan was, he still had a faint arrogance. However, there was still a faint arrogance in him, and he did not have much awe for Luo Fan. Even later, when his cultivation level increased, and he gradually learned of Luo Fan's power, he became rather reverent and pious towards Luo Fan. Deep in his heart, he still had that sliver of arrogance. He felt that his identity was different from the other cultivators who had been enlightened by Luo Fan. He felt that he should be much stronger than other cultivators. But now, after he comprehended the mysteries of the continent, he realized that the mysteries that he had only managed to grasp with great difficulty were only a small, insignificant part of the continent. In fact, if he was not careful, he would easily overlook a small part of it. On the other hand, Luo Fan was hidden in the depths of a position that he couldn't understand. It was even possible that the entire continent was created by him, and these mysteries were all grasped by him. Under such circumstances, he naturally knew how insignificant he was. He knew how weak and fragile he was compared to Luo Fan. How could the trace of arrogance that existed in the bottom of his heart still exist? As a result, of course, he naturally became reverent and pious. Luo Fan smiled and casually pulled over the Air Maiden and the Child Creation God. He turned to the Divine God, and the others and said, "The Divine God, you have knowledge that they do not understand. In a moment, tell them everything. As for the rest of you, you also have knowledge of cultivation that the Divine God does not understand. In a moment, you can pass it on to him. Now, you are all free to move about. Every place here contains many mysteries of cultivation. It is a rare opportunity. You just have to grasp it. With that, he did not bother to listen to their reply. With a wave of his hand, he sent everyone to a place that was opposite to where they were, away from the huge door. Divine and the others were overjoyed to pay their respects to the immortal elder they had waited for over 10,000 years. Just as they were about to report to the immortal elder or ask him about something, they suddenly heard the immortal elder say those words without any head or tail. Then the surrounding world instantly changed, and they appeared in a completely unfamiliar place. For a time, everyone looked at each other and felt as if they were caught off guard. What does the immortal elder mean? Someone asked the question that was on everyone's mind. However, they were not ordinary people after all. Soon, they recalled every single word that Luo Fan had said. After thinking about it carefully, they realized that the reason they wanted to know the truth was to communicate. For a moment, the divine god and the others all looked at the only unfamiliar person, the man that the immortal elder called the divine god. As for the divine god, his gaze also moved between the divine god and the divine god. Clearly, he could tell that the divine god and the divine god were the leaders of the group. Since they knew that the key was to communicate, both sides naturally did not hold back. Soon, after a round of greetings, the divine god knew who the people present were, and the divine god and the others also knew the divine god's identity. So you're the great sage. To be able to see you here is really unexpected. The divine god looked at the divine god with a strange expression and said, "Are you trying to say that it is unbelievable that I, the one who has benefited the most from the technological civilization, would turn to the cultivation faction?" The divine god knew what the divine god was thinking and couldn't help but smile. Through the introduction just now, he had a rough idea of the current situation in the universe. Although his expression changed slightly when he saw that the entire cultivation camp had been forced into such a state, he did not feel any hostility toward the heavenly gods and the others because of it. "I'm a little surprised. Originally, we thought that you were the strongest enemy in the universe war." The divine god naturally had nothing to hide and directly nodded. "Hee, if you know what I'm going to tell you, you won't be surprised." The divine god smiled. "I would like to hear the details." The divine god's expression became solemn. The divine god did not hide anything and directly told them how he met Luo Fan, how he talked with Luo Fan, how he learned the truth about the abnormality of the universe, how he knew how to enter another universe, and so on. He told them everything without holding anything back. This was not a short speech, but the divine had spoken for over 2 hours. He had even used many special methods to echo his words, so that the heavenly gods and the others could understand his meaning as accurately as possible. They did their best to avoid any unnecessary misunderstandings because of what he said. When they heard this, the god of heaven and the others were shocked. They were cultivators native to this universe, so they naturally couldn't remain calm when faced with the truth of the universe. Everyone fell into silence at this moment. Chapter 1199. That's right. Shin nodded. "So that's how it is." Shin could not help but smile wryly. He looked at the tiny crack that had appeared on the huge door in the distance, and his gaze became extremely complicated. There was a sense of shock, hatred, and an indescribable sense of loss. To him, the appearance of a universe had already far exceeded his imagination. This had never happened in all of his previous guesses about the truth of the universe. This kind of reality was like a sharp sword that pierced him. The others were in a similar state as Shun. They all had extremely complicated expressions. After a long while, it gradually recovered. None of them mentioned the truth that stung their minds. Instead, they asked Shintan to pass on some common knowledge about cultivation to Shun. This was different from when these common knowledge about cultivation was widely spread. Compared to back then, the person receiving this information was not an ordinary person or an ordinary cultivator. Instead, it was a powerful cultivator who had already reached the Khanate Grand Luo realm and could be considered as a great perfection realm cultivator. As such, the process of passing on common knowledge about cultivation did not take that long. nor did it need to be so complicated. Shen Tun directly compressed the A-Team's memories into a speck of light and poured it into Shun Tun's mind. It suddenly erupted, turning into information and memories that fused with Shun Tun's mind. As the information erupted, Shun Tun's performance was much better than Shin Tun's. He had only stood there blankly for half a day, but he had already completely absorbed all the information, memories, and common knowledge about cultivation. He had completely turned it into his own memories and even gained his own understanding. This was not because Shun Tun was stronger than Shun Tun when he first received the common knowledge about cultivation. Instead, it was because Shun Tun was countless times weaker than Luo Fan, who had compressed the information into the depths of his memories. Because of this weakness, he could not perfectly recreate the information that Luo Fan had compressed into the depths of his memories. Even if it was a simulation, it was not truly perfect. It was also because of this that the pressure on the divine settlement was several times weaker than the pressure from Luo Fan's information on the divine settlements. Because of this, even though Shun Tun's cultivation was not as good as Shin Tun's, his performance was several times better than Shun Tun's back then. After completely accepting these memories, an inexplicable expression involuntarily appeared on Shun Shung's face. He let out a long sigh and said, "So I'm missing so many foundations. No wonder I've been comprehending so many mysteries over the years, but I always feel that I'm not strong enough." As he sighed, various kinds of indescribable light radiated from his body, faintly communicating with the world formed by the aura around him. It was as if there were countless profound mysteries of cultivation that were constantly being integrated into his body through this kind of communication, becoming part of him. With this change, the divine light in his eyes gradually took on a mysterious charm. His cultivation base gradually rose as well, constantly approaching the peak of the Khanate Grand Immortal Realm. Such a change made the heavenly deity and the others envious. Although their cultivation realms were many times faster than ordinary cultivators, they still had to work hard to improve between the Khanate and Zenith Heaven realms, climbing up bit by bit. How could it be as easy as this moment of holiness? With such ease? He actually rose so quickly, reaching the peak of the Khanate Grand Immortal Realm in the blink of an eye. Fortunately, there was still a limit to Shun Shung's improvement, although there was still quite a bit of stamina after reaching the peak. However, this stamina was not enough for him to surpass the limit of the peak of the Khanate Grand Immortal Realm and step into the Demi-Saint realm. Only then did the dumbfounded heavenly deity and the others feel a little better. When all the changes had calmed down, Shun Shung could not help but look a little regretful. Clearly, he was not resigned to the fact that his cultivation had only risen to this realm and could not break through any further. Congratulations, fellow Taoist. Seeing that his terrifying breakthrough had stopped, the heavenly deity and the others hurriedly went up to congratulate him. This was necessary. The increase of a cultivator's cultivation realm was a joyous matter for him, as long as he had a bit of understanding of the ways of the world. As long as he had some understanding of the ways of the world, he should go up to congratulate him. And the heavenly deity and the others were not cultivators who were completely ignorant of the ways of the world. Although Holiness was a little regretful that he could not continue to break through, he knew that this was not something he could not accept. Hearing everyone's congratulations, he calmed himself down. Hearing everyone's congratulations, he calmed himself down and thanked them. What do you all plan to do next? Do you want to stay in this universe or follow the immortal to another universe of a higher level? Shun Shung asked the heavenly deity and the others, who were somewhat familiar with him. His words caused the heavenly deity and the others to look at each other, all somewhat vexed. After all, it had only been a few short days since they found out about the truth of this universe. Before this, they had never thought that this universe could be affected or even controlled by some sort of aura. Under such circumstances, all they could think about was how to live a better life in this universe and cultivate to a higher realm. After hearing the true situation of the universe, they naturally felt a sense of unwillingness in their hearts. Why should we live in a universe that is absolutely influenced and even controlled by other universes. What was the difference between living in someone's shadow? It was precisely this unwillingness that made them unwilling to follow their original plan of staying in this universe to better cultivate and live a better life. However, they did not suffer as much as Shun Shung. After suffering for tens of billions of years, they were unable to be like Shun Shung and abandon everything they had in this universe in order to pursue the truth in their hearts, to pursue that trace of obsession in the depths of their hearts. It was precisely this unwillingness and hesitation that caused everyone to become so hesitant and vexed. Of course, Shun Shung did not have the authority to decide whether or not they could leave this place. He had only asked this out of curiosity and did not necessarily need an answer from them. Seeing that everyone had sunk into vexation, he chuckled. He did not continue this topic. After conversing with everyone for a while, he bid them farewell and left this place. He went alone to search for the various mysteries of cultivation that were within the scope of his understanding. After Shun Shung left, the heavenly deity and the others sank into silence. Compared to Shun Shung, who they had only known for a few days, they had become even more familiar with each other. After living together for tens of thousands of years, they were even more familiar with each other. Many things that could not be said in front of Shun Shung could be said in front of each other. Right now, we are almost the highest existences in this universe. Our various cultivation resources are supported by almost the entire universe. This is also the key reason why we can reach such a high level in such a short period of time. If we enter a completely unfamiliar universe, we will not be able to reach such a high level. If we enter a completely unfamiliar universe, our status, our power, and our cultivation resources will all be swept away. When that time comes, even if that universe is of a higher level than this universe, our cultivation speed will almost certainly be slower than it is now. At this moment, a cultivator who had already reached the quasi-sage stage after being enlightened by Luo Fan said, "That does make sense. However, are you really willing to live in a universe where the laws of this universe will be completely changed by the slightest influence from the aura of that universe? Here, no matter how high one's cultivation realm is, no matter how powerful one's divine ability is, a single change in the laws of the universe could make one nothing. Just like in the current faction of technology. Although we are not completely reduced to mortals, our divine abilities are greatly suppressed. However, their abilities are also greatly suppressed. They are only able to unleash 1/10,000th of their full power," another cultivator retorted. Although the laws of the universe will change due to the changes in that universe, which universe is not the same? Who knows if that universe is not under the influence of the aura of another universe? Who knows if that universe is not the shadow of another universe? Moreover, the laws of the universe have changed. Who knows how many trillions of years have passed since ancient times? Apart from the cultivation nation that we have established, how much has the laws of the entire universe changed? The cultivator who first spoke retorted with a frown. Before these cultivators were enlightened by Luo Fan, they were all extremely outstanding people. Naturally, none of them were bad at arguing. Those who were inclined to enter the portal and enter a higher-level universe had a clear and logical reason for doing so. Anyone who heard it would feel that this was the only correct thing to do. Otherwise, they would be consigned to eternal damnation. As for those who were inclined to stay in this universe, they also had a large number of reasons. Their arguments were also clear and logical, and everyone who heard it would feel that this was the correct thing to do. Under such circumstances, it was natural that neither side could convince the other. However, through this argument, the inclination of the dozens of people present gradually became clear. Those who were inclined to enter the portal and enter the other universe were mainly the heavenly gods and Shintoan. Although there were only 6 or 7 of them, which was only a small portion of the total number, their overall strength was much stronger than those who were left behind in this universe and held great power and were supported by the entire universe. All right, although we have been advancing and retreating together all these years, There is no reason for us to advance and retreat together. Seeing that neither side could convince the other, the God of heaven came to a conclusion. Since neither of us can convince the other, then there's only one way. We will each choose. If you want to enter another universe, you can enter. If you want to stay in this universe, you can stay. At present, the tens of cultivators present had split into two sides and were engaged in an intense debate. However, they did not completely fall out with each other, and this kind of argument was not enough to turn them into enemies. Thus, the identity and status of Empyrean gods still had a very strong deterrent force. This deterrent force caused everyone who had been arguing to fall silent after he said this. For a group that had been together for a long time, when they suddenly had to split up, everyone would definitely feel some reluctance in their hearts. This had nothing to do with sentimental emotions. However, even though he was sad and reluctant to part with her. However, it was clear that everyone present believed that they wouldn't change their minds just because they were reluctant to part with the team. Hence, even though they were reluctant to part with each other, they eventually nodded and agreed to Cammy's arrangement. In fact, staying in this universe and going to another, more advanced universe. There was no right or wrong between them, and there was no advantage or disadvantage. The choice of which way to go was based on one's own ambition and choice. After deciding to split up, the tense atmosphere that had enveloped everyone present instantly disappeared and was replaced by an inexplicable sadness. When they looked at each other again, they no longer felt that they were not pleasing to the eye. Instead, they gradually recalled all the times they had spent together over the years. Cammy and the others pulled over the cultivators they were familiar with and began to explain everything they were worried about in this universe, so that they could take care of it on their behalf in the future. Just like that, a few more days passed. Only at this moment did they sigh and scatter in all directions. They began to search for all kinds of mysteries that they could comprehend, and worked hard to absorb all the principles of cultivation that they could absorb. Whether it was staying in this universe or entering a brand new universe, for them, cultivation was the most important. It was a great opportunity to be able to cultivate in this universe that was full of mysteries. Previously, they had wasted a lot of time arguing about the fundamental contradiction. This had already caused them great heartache. Now that they began to comprehend freely, they naturally wouldn't waste any more time. After sending the Cammy and the others off, Luo Fan smiled and said to the air hostess, "You're now full of energy. Obviously, you've temporarily completed your training. You need to go into seclusion to digest it before you can continue training. Do you want to go into seclusion right now?" So that's what you're thinking, but when I see this world, I suddenly have some different ideas. The air hostess looked around and said, "This world is actually a world of aura. It's the aura of the devil realm that is divided and derived by the influence of this vortex. Everything here is actually a distorted miniature of the entire devil realm. Everything you see can be found in the devil realm. Just like the grass under your feet, don't think that it's so fragile and small. In fact, it corresponds to a practitioner at the Tao Master realm in the devil realm." Luo Fan laughed and explained the reality of this world to the air hostess. Hearing this, the air hostess's eyes lit up and she said, "Why does the existence at the Tao Master realm correspond to this grass? That means the countless trees and rocks in this world. Doesn't it correspond to a stronger practitioner? Is the devil realm really so powerful?" Luo Fan shook his head with a smile and said, "How is that possible? It's just that this place is special. In other places, it's already rare for a mountain to correspond to a practitioner at the Tao Master realm. I'm afraid that only something at the level of the mountain can correspond to a practitioner at the Tao Master realm." "I see, but this is also quite shocking." The air hostess first sighed, and then a shocked expression appeared on her face. Even if a mountain was equivalent to a Tao Master, according to the number of mountain ranges in this world, the number of Tao Masters in the devil realm should be counted in hundreds of billions or even trillions. Such a terrifying number was enough to shock people in any case. Master, you said this place is special? What's special here?" At this time, the spirit-creating boy, who had been carefully standing beside, finally could not help but ask out of curiosity. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and touched the head of the spirit-creating boy, saying, "You seem to have changed a little this time. Did you figure out something through the experience?" Hearing this, the spirit-creating boy could not help but feel an inexplicable warmth in his heart. He once again thought of the words that the air hostess had said to him outside. Sure enough, as Madame said, Master doesn't just regard me as a magic treasure. It was not difficult to deduce the result of her inference. If Luo Fan only regarded her as a magic treasure, as a tool, why would he care about the emotional changes of this tool? Why would he care about the subtle changes in her mentality? However, as an awkward child, it was obviously impossible for the spirit-creating boy to directly say what he thought in his heart. He just patted Luo Fan's hand, and after slapping it away, he pouted and said, "What's the change? I've always been like this." "Master, don't change the topic. Tell me what's special about this place. Why is there such an anomaly here?" Luo Fan did not explore the change of the spirit-creating boy's mentality. His hand was pushed away, but he did not stretch it out again. He pointed behind him and said, "You could try to move forward no matter what method you use, even if it's teleportation through time and space. Master's really naughty. You even keep me guessing." Hearing this, the spirit-creating boy muttered there with his mouth pouted. The air hostess, who was listening on the side, could not help but chuckle at his words. She looked at Luo Fan with a very amused expression. Luo Fan showed a wry smile on his face. He gently knocked on the forehead of the spirit-creating boy and said, "Hurry up and move. So much nonsense." Chapter 1200. The spirit-creating boy covered his head and mumbled to himself. However, he still took a step forward. With this step, he exerted his full strength and her flying ability to the extreme. If she was somewhere else, it would be easy for her to cross trillions of light years with this flying method. But here, she felt as if she had flown for trillions of light years. But when she landed on the ground, she found that she had only taken a small step forward from where she was standing before. At this moment, under her feet, there seemed to be an invisible barrier in front of the tip of her toes, completely isolating her from the front. How is this possible? The spirit-creating boy had never encountered such a thing. For a moment, he could not believe it. He took another step forward, and this time he also exerted the flying ability that was almost at the extreme. It also felt like he had crossed trillions of light years. However, when he landed, he found that the situation was worse than before. He was still at the same place. He did not even move a bit. Although the air hostess had expected this, she could not help but open her mouth in disbelief when she saw that the spirit-creating boy could not step into the void in front of her. She looked at Luo Fan. Luo Fan nodded to her and let go of her hand. The air hostess took a step forward and also used her most powerful flying ability. Although her cultivation realm was not as good as that of the spirit-creating boy or Luo Fan, she was still a profound sage-to-be. When she exerted this flying ability, the effect was quite shocking. If it was in other places, it would be at least hundreds of billions of light years. But here, what she encountered was no different from the boy creation of God. She was also stuck in the position that was separated by a thin line from the void. Compared to her original position, it was only a short step. The air hostess also could not believe it. She took another step forward. However, this time, she did not use any magic. Instead, she took a step forward that any ordinary person could take. With this step, the abnormality that appeared was even more obvious. She felt that she had indeed taken this step, but when she finally took the step, she found that she was standing in the exact same position as before. It was as if her original position was just one step away from this boundary. Why? The spirit-creating boy finally asked the question that had puzzled the air hostess. Why is that? I want to know too. I'm just wondering. The area in front is corresponding to the sages in the demon realm. Luo Fan sighed and said, "The sage of the devil realm." Realization dawned on the air maiden's face. Luo Fan had already told her about the existence of the sage of the devil realm when he told her about the devil realm, so she was naturally not surprised. Obviously, for a sage, Any inconceivable thing could not be more normal if it was related to it. That was why she had a look of sudden enlightenment at this moment. It turns out to be the sage of the devil realm. This is indeed the only possibility. Since this world is formed by all the aura of the devil realm, the aura of the sage should naturally be included in it. She murmured, "Since you know that this may be formed by the aura of the sage of the devil realm, then you should be very clear about why the aura of those Tao masters become so small here, right?" Luo Fan said with a smile, "I have known for a long time. The majesty of a sage is so powerful that even a Tao master can only shrink his neck in front of it. Even a Tao master would have to lower his head." The Space Maiden sighed and said, "By the way, how many of such places are there?" As she spoke, her expression became rather curious. After all, it was related to the secret of how many sages there were in the devil realm. Even someone as indifferent as her could not hold back her curiosity. 54 places, Luo Fan said with emotion. 54 places. The air hostess turned pale with fright, and her face became extremely shocked. Obviously, the answer given by Luo Fan had already exceeded the limits of her imagination. Her first feeling was that it was impossible. There are only 7 sages in the Earth universe. As a part of the Earth universe, how could there be as many as 54 sages in the devil realm? Because the air hostess had communicated with Luo Fan, she knew what Luo Fan called the world where they used to live. If you marry a man, follow him. Naturally, she followed him and called the world the Earth universe. We don't know what is going on now. It's not certain whether there are as many as 54 sages. But even if there are 54 sages, it only means that there are deeper mysteries that we don't understand. It doesn't mean anything else. Luo Fan shook his head and said. The air hostess took a deep breath and only calmed herself down after a long while. She said, "I shouldn't be thinking about these things now. I should properly comprehend the mysteries that I can comprehend and add resources for me to reorganize my view of the world." Me too. At this moment, the boy creation god finally found a chance to interject. He shouted loudly and expressed his desire to improve. Faced with the boy creation god's unusual behavior, Luo Fan could not help but be surprised. Normally, even if Luo Fan wanted her to understand these mysteries, she would definitely refuse and think of all kinds of ways to delay it. However, at this time, she actually took the initiative to mention it before Luo Fan said anything. This was strange no matter how he looked at it. Thinking about this, he could not help but look at the air hostess inquisitively. Naturally, the air hostess was very clear about Luo Fan's doubts. She only chuckled and did not explain. She only touched the boy creation god's head and said, "Then you'll have to work hard." The boy creation god nodded vigorously. His face was full of fighting spirit. Seeing this, Luo Fan only smiled and did not pursue the matter. At that moment, the two of them and the treasure began their own cultivation. Luo Fan continued the extremely primitive way that he used to explore the mysteries in front of him in the past tens of thousands of years. He experienced all kinds of gains that he could not understand. On the other hand, the Space Maiden and the boy creation spirit chose to observe and comprehend the things that they could understand and could benefit them greatly. Time passed slowly in this process. In the blink of an eye, 100,000 years had passed. On this day, Luo Fan, who was walking forward in a normal posture, but his body seemed to be walking on the spot, suddenly trembled. His body suddenly crossed the illusory boundary and broke into the boundless nothingness in front of him. At this moment, in Luo Fan's perception, the boundless and terrifying strange river in front of him, which seemed to contain all the mysteries of the universe, suddenly stagnated. The force that pushed him back to his original position suddenly loosened. Although his body was still pushed back, he did not get pushed back to his original position. Instead, he appeared in a position that was a line away from his original position. It just happened that he broke through the invisible boundary slightly. At the moment when he broke through the boundary, the huge, boundless river in front of him suddenly disappeared. It was replaced by an absolute nothingness. This nothingness did not mean that there was nothing at all. There was nothing at all. Even the nothingness that did not exist in space-time and rules of law was billions of times stronger than that level of nothingness. Compared with the nothingness at this moment, the nothingness in Luo Fan's memory in the past was like a cabinet filled with countless things. There were so many things that he was almost satisfied with. In the face of such nothingness, Luo Fan felt that his entire mind, spirit, perception, body, magic power, and even life imprint, everything was rapidly transforming into nothingness. A feeling that everything about him was about to turn into this nothingness arose spontaneously. But it was such a feeling. In an instant, it turned into nothingness and completely disappeared without a trace. In such a moment, Luo Fan was like a melting wax man. Everything was gradually becoming illusory and gradually disappearing. At this moment, his body shook and he was bounced out of the state of nothingness. The boundless river was produced again, washing him back to his original position. With such a change, everything about him returned to his original position. Spirit, imprint, perception, mind, body, magic power, everything was completely restored to normal in an instant. After returning to normal, Luo Fan stopped in his tracks. His eyes were filled with a kind of daze. So, this is the consequence of touching the sage of the demon realm. Such a thought flashed in his mind. Everything that he had experienced in that instant was constantly circulating in his mind, constantly decomposing, constantly changing, and constantly magnifying. Every little bit of it, even the slightest change, was magnified to the extreme in his mind. How his body was decomposed, how his magic power was melted, his mind, his spirit, his perception, his imprint, and how everything about him changed under the effect of the change. These kinds of things again and again circulated in his mind. The sage of the demon realm is indeed not as good as the sage of the earth universe. A few months later, Luo Fan broke away from that state. His face showed an inexplicable expression, and his eyes were shining brightly. His whole person looked very bright. It was already very different from a few months ago. At this moment, not only had all of his cultivation achievements attached to his body, but even his magic power had completely integrated with all of his cultivation achievements. Apart from that, his mind, consciousness, perception, and spirit had all taken a solid step forward in this direction. The degree of fusion was many times stronger than it had been in the past. Although there was not much change in his cultivation realm, his overall strength had already increased by several times. Moreover, it had built his foundation for attaining the fruit of chaos Tao even more solid. It gave him an inexplicable feeling that he could look up to the fruit of chaos Tao. Luo Fan, how are you? At this moment, the somewhat anxious voice of the air hostess came into Luo Fan's ears. When Luo Fan heard this, he turned his head and found that the air hostess and the spirit-creating boy had been guarding him since some time ago. At this moment, both of them were looking at him with worried eyes. After thinking for a while, he knew what was going on. Thinking about it, it should have been several months ago when he suddenly broke into the void, and the changes that happened to his body caused his aura to change. Perhaps this change was similar to him losing his life and vitality. This naturally caused them to be alarmed and frightened. Thus, they stopped their own comprehensions and began to stand guard by his side, wanting to see what had happened to him. After thinking it through, he smiled and said, "I'm fine. I'm very good. Not only am I fine, but I've also comprehended many mysteries and gained many benefits. If that's the case, then I'm relieved." Hearing this, the air hostess observed carefully and did not find any trace of Luo Fan lying. She could not help but let out a long breath. The spirit-creating boy also showed an inexplicable expression of joy. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not help but smile and said, "What are you worried about me? You're thinking too much." Saying this, he rubbed the head of the spirit-creating boy and pulled the air hostess's hand. However, even though he said this, in his heart, he still felt a little scared. A few months ago, he was only a small step away from completely disappearing. If he broke into the void for a moment longer, or even less than a moment, as long as he was a moment longer, then what awaited him would really be death. His soul would be destroyed, and everything about him would be completely integrated into the void. Now that he thought about it, the danger at that time was almost the closest to death that he had come into contact with in his life. As for the reason, after thinking about it for a few months, he had already figured it out. The reason for this was very simple. It was because he broke into the void because of some inexplicable change in the aura. Thus, he came into contact with the traces of the sage's power contained in the aura. Anything, as long as it was related to the sage, would become extremely shocking and terrifying. This was especially the case for the sage's power. Although this trace of a saint's might was insignificant compared to a saint, for Luo Fan, who had yet to become a saint, it was a terrifying might that countless heavens and earth had descended from the sky to oppress him. This kind of power, it directly acted on his body, instantly suppressing him and completely disintegrating all of Luo Fan's will. From another point of view, if Luo Fan was regarded as a magical treasure, then he would not be able to do so. Then, the change that the traces of the sage's power produced in this instant was to erase all the imprints and will inside the magical treasure. It wanted to plant itself in it, which was to refine the magical treasure. And obviously, with Luo Fan's cultivation realm, his strength, his physical body, his magic power, and everything else, although it was already so terrifying and unbelievable in the eyes of ordinary cultivators, compared to the insignificant aura of the sage, there was still a world of difference. The traces of the sage's power wanted to refine Luo Fan, so naturally, it was impossible to keep him in such a low-level form of existence. Instead, it wanted to transform him and integrate him into the sage's aura. This led to the situation that happened a few months ago, where everything inside Luo Fan's body completely integrated into the void. As for why the sage of the demon realm was said to be inferior to the 7 sages of the earth universe, the reason was even simpler. Because the sage's power would instinctively suppress everything, transform everything. This was simply a situation that would occur when one could not perfectly control one's aura and one's own power. Even for ordinary cultivators, it was the most basic requirement to be able to completely restrain one's aura and completely control all of one's power. This was a stronger performance than those who could not control their aura and all of their power. This sage of the demon realm could not completely control his own power, so this power would instinctively suppress and refine everything. Compared to the sages of the earth universe who could perfectly control everything, the sage of the demon realm was much weaker in terms of realm. It was because of this that Luo Fan said that the sage of the demon realm was inferior to the sages of the earth universe. However, Luo Fan did not tell the air hostess and the other 2 at this time. Instead, he only asked them about what they had gained in the past 100,000 years. Seeing that Luo Fan was fine, the air hostess and the spirit-creating boy were naturally no longer worried. After hearing Luo Fan's questions, they roughly told him about their experiences. There was nothing much to say about their specific experiences. It was nothing more than discovering what kind of cultivation mysteries were contained in things. After such 100,000 years of cultivation, the air hostess's cultivation realm had reached the peak of the great accomplishment sage to be. She was only one step away from breaking through the great accomplishment sage to be and becoming a peak sage to be. Of course, this was only secondary. The most important thing was that she could vaguely grasp the key to sorting out her worldview. She could then start to create her own cultivation method according to the outline of her worldview, just like Luo Fan had done in the past. In other words, it was time for the air stewardess to start her cultivation again, so fast. It took me millions of years to reach this step. Now, you've reached this step in just 100,000 years. I'm really ashamed. Luo Fan could not help but be overjoyed and laughed when he heard the harvest. Chapter 1201. After talking for a while, the empty girl entered the creation god palace. She went into closed-door training to sort out the key to her worldview according to what she had obtained. The god-creating boy had also made great progress in the past 100,000 years. Because he was a magic treasure, it was difficult for him to improve his cultivation realm like the empty girl. However, Because of the understanding of the many mysteries of cultivation contained in the aura world, she gradually developed all kinds of mysterious power contained in her body. At this moment, although her overall essence had not improved much, she did not need the control of the master. The power she could exert had been hundreds of times stronger than before. Now, she could truly be called a town master-level magic treasure. Luo Fan was quite satisfied with the changes of the god-creating boy. However, it was obvious. However, he would not show his satisfaction directly. Instead, he casually and faintly acknowledged her gains. But even so, it had already made the god-creating boy very happy and satisfied. Although the child creation god was different from the Empyrean maiden and did not need to sort out his own worldview, in the past 100,000 years, he had been comprehending all kinds of mysteries in this world, which had already made him feel full. If Luo Fan had not inexplicably changed and interrupted her comprehension, she might have been able to comprehend for a while longer. But after being interrupted by Luo Fan, it was extremely difficult for her to enter the state of understanding again. Therefore, when the empty girl entered the body of her body to sort out her own worldview, the god-creating boy did not continue to understand. Instead, he turned around and entered the body of Luo Fan to sleep. After a while, only Luo Fan was left here. The area formed by the aura of these sages is too dangerous. If I am not careful, I will die and my soul will scatter. It is not good for me to continue to understand them. Luo Fan looked at the strange nothingness around him, and such thoughts flashed through his mind. This spot had almost assimilated him into nothingness, causing his body and Tao to vanish. His soul dispersed. It was conceivable that the 54 areas that might have been formed by the condensation of the aura of the Devil Realm saints might also have the same quality. If he were to use the same method he had used over 100,000 years ago to explore these areas and try to step into those areas, it was very likely that some strange changes would occur in those areas, and his existence would be completely erased at some point in time. It was like an ordinary man dancing on the tip of a knife. If there was no other way, if he didn't jump, he would die. Naturally, Luo Fan would gladly accept it. But now it was not that critical. Luo Fan, on the other hand, was unwilling to give up other great and safe methods in order to choose this kind of dangerous method where he could lose his life at any time to experience this mystery. He didn't take it lightly and arrived at the front door of the huge door. He stood in front of the huge crack on the door, sat down cross-legged, and slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, his perception gushed out of his body without holding back. In an instant, it enveloped the entire vortex, the entire aura world, and the entire huge door that connected this universe and the Devil Realm. Compared to the 54 areas that were suspected to be formed by the aura of the saints, all the other areas in this aura world were mysterious to Luo Fan. Even if there were many profound, obscure, and even incomprehensible mysteries and principles, they had not reached the point where he couldn't find a way to comprehend them. Therefore, he didn't need to appear in a certain place to slowly probe and comprehend the profundities contained in those places bit by bit like he did in the past 100,000 years. He only needed to release his senses here, and he would naturally be able to comprehend all the profundities he needed as if he was personally there. Everything in this aura world was formed by the aura of a certain existence in the Devil Realm and contained some mysteries of the Devil Realm. Even those things that were countless times weaker than Luo Fan in terms of realm were not completely useless to him. The principles contained in them could also give him some enlightenment. It was just a matter of how much. Therefore, at this time, Luo Fan did not choose a special individual. Instead, he comprehended all the mysteries contained in this aura world in detail. He used this comprehension to supplement his own view of the world and provide resources for the advancement of his cultivation realm. 10,000 years later, Luo Fan completed all the mysteries and principles contained in the things formed by the aura of existences that were not as strong as him. Only the things that he felt were a little obscure and contained some mysteries that he could not understand were left. There were hundreds of thousands of things that he had not comprehended yet. After completing such an experience, the aura emitted by Luo Fan's body became more and more complete. Perception, spirit, mind, and all the other things that had yet to be completely integrated with his own cultivation had become much deeper in terms of the degree of integration. At this moment, he could naturally create a mini kiliocosm and a medium kiliocosm with just his gaze. Once his perception was released, he could create worlds that could be created and destroyed with the various thoughts that appeared in his mind at any time and place. Furthermore, his spirit had become extremely powerful. Even with just his spirit alone, he could already unleash power that was only slightly stronger than his physical body. This included defensive power as well as everything else, and not just offensive power. Such a change was already what he had expected back then. It was not far from the state of cultivating everything in one's body to the point where it was completely integrated with everything that one had cultivated in the past. In other words, he was only one step away from cultivating to the true perfection of his realm. In other words, he knew that he was close to the state of a sage. Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes. He could not help but reveal a faint smile on his face. I wonder what will happen if I cultivate everything to the realm of perfection. He sensed the changes in his body and could not help but have this inexplicable thought in his mind. At this moment, his aura was completely restrained. His whole body floated there like an ordinary stone. There was nothing special about him at all. He was like a very ordinary stone sculpture. The reason why his aura was so restrained was because his aura was close to integrating all his past cultivation achievements into it. This kind of fusion naturally greatly increased his strength, allowing him to take another step closer to the characteristics of a saint. However, this also meant that every single strand of his aura contained everything about him. If he continued to emit it, it would be as if he was loudly announcing all of his cultivation achievements to the entire universe. If any part of his aura was cut off by someone, it was as if a clone or an incarnation had been completely taken away. If it was not necessary, it was obviously better to completely restrain these auras and not reveal a trace of them. However, even if there was no aura at all, but Luo Fan's body was also faintly flickering with invisible phantoms. These phantoms, it wasn't because of any power that Luo Fan was emitting, but rather because time and space were naturally condensing towards him, naturally colliding with his body and taking shape. They wanted to condense into one and become a real space-time. But they could not be stabilized for a long time. They could not even be formed for a moment. The reason why time and space naturally condensed and formed around his body was because at this moment, whether it was his physical body, magic power, spirit, perception, aura, etc., everything was close to completely integrating all his past cultivation achievements. Therefore, it naturally produced some kind of indescribable special ability. It formed some kind of strange attraction or control over time and space. Therefore, time and space condensed towards him. They wanted to condense around his body into a space-time that was completely born according to him. Luo Fan raised his hand and opened it. He looked at the invisible phantoms that were constantly changing, overlapping and intertwining in his palm, but also constantly collapsing. He had a faint smile on his face. This cultivation direction is indeed correct. I am now only at the exceptional realm of Town Master. I have not even reached the ultimate exceptional realm with this cultivation method, but I can already lead the natural condensation of space-time. If my cultivation realm reaches the 9th step, I may be able to naturally separate the chaos in the state of chaos and condense the time and space in it into one. Leave space-time. At that time, I will be able to survive in the state of chaos. Even if I can't directly achieve the fruit of chaos and become a sage, I will still obtain the real detachment and the real freedom. From then on, I will not be shackled by any perfect world. As he opened and closed his palm, he constantly crushed the phantoms in his palm. Then he looked at these phantoms condensing again and again, with such a longing in his heart. Becoming a sage was the supreme pursuit for all cultivators. It meant that they could not be defeated by thousands of tribulations. It meant that they would never perish. it meant that they were omniscient and omnipotent. It contained everything that a cultivator could imagine and could not imagine. However, for any cultivator, there was one thing that attracted them the most. That was, they could not be defeated by thousands of tribulations. Yes, it was not eternal, omniscient, and omnipotent, but the characteristic of being able to be defeated by thousands of tribulations. There was no other reason. Any cultivator, except for the chaos god who created the world, was born in a certain world. If they were lucky, they would be born in a big world. If they were less lucky, they would be born in a perfect world. Then they would be born in a boundless world, a middle-class world, a minor world, or even a cultivator's Taoist right, a grotto heaven, and other spaces. No matter which world they were born in, for cultivators, they were controlled by the world from the moment they were born. In normal times, under the condition that the world was intact, this cultivator might be immortal, could be eternal, could be free, and could enjoy all the pleasures he could think of. However, even in a big world that could accommodate countless saints, as long as any cultivator did not become a saint, as long as the world existed, he would be destroyed. This situation was like a puppet. When the person who controlled the puppet wanted to control it, the puppet could do anything like a real person. However, once the person who controlled the puppet lost interest and threw the puppet away, the puppet could only become an ordinary piece of wood and could only lie in a deserted corner and quietly rot. In contrast, although the state of a cultivator was better than that of a puppet, at least they had more autonomy. They were still the same as a puppet in essence. It was just that the puppet was controlled by the human behind it, while the cultivator was controlled by the world that contained it, or the big world. For a living being who had just become a cultivator, the truth of this matter was, perhaps they would not think too clearly. However, once a cultivator lived a little longer, even the most ignorant cultivator will be able to think of a few more problems. If they couldn't think of it in a year, what about in 10 years? In 100 years? In 1,000 years? 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 10 million years, 100 million years, 1,000,000,000,000 years, as long as they lived long enough. How could they not think of this kind of problem that could be solved with just a little bit of thinking? Therefore, for all cultivators who had the intention of becoming a saint, this fact was definitely not a secret. And obviously, to get rid of this kind of thing was not much different from being a puppet. It seemed extremely beautiful in ordinary times, but once the world changed, they could only wait for death. Only then would cultivators pursue becoming a saint. To be more specific, after becoming a saint, it was the kind of supreme state that would not be harmed even if the world was perfect and the big world was completely destroyed. Therefore, it was very obvious that among the many characteristics after becoming a saint, it was the most important to all cultivators. Compared to this, other things like omniscience, and omnipotence were so insignificant. To be able to be unharmed by 10,000 tribulations, to have endless years, all these things could be obtained one day. If one didn't have the characteristic of being unharmed by 10,000 tribulations, no matter how strong one was, no matter how much one knew, and no matter how powerful one's ability was, everything would become a shadow after one tribulation. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan could not help but speculate that his own cultivation method might be obtained in the state of chaos above the 9th step. He was so excited that he would no longer be shackled by the survival of the world. Although it was very difficult to set foot on the 9th step, after all, there were traces of it. In the countless years of history of the Earth's universe, although not many had appeared, it was still counted in the hundreds of thousands, or even millions, or even tens of millions. In comparison, although proving one's Tao and becoming a saint seemed to be only one step higher than the 9th step, since ancient times, since the Earth's universe was created until now, who knew how many trillions of years, and even counting the years in the Gailai era, there had only been 7 from this. It could be seen that one could obtain the characteristic of being unharmed by 10,000 tribulations that only saints could obtain after setting foot on the 9th step. How many times had the difficulty been reduced? After a period of longing and excitement, Luo Fan slowly calmed his emotions. His perception, which had integrated most of his past cultivation achievements, moved and grasped everything in this world of aura. At this moment, there was not only Luo Fan in this world of aura. Apart from him, there were also heavenly deities, Shintuan, and dozens of other cultivators. They had also stayed here for hundreds of thousands of years. Among them, Shintuan was the one with the highest cultivation realm back then, but he had barely become a minor sage to be. After him were heavenly deities, who were only one step away from becoming a minor sage to be, and other cultivators of different cultivation realms. The weakest was even a Khanate Zenith Heaven cultivator. Given their cultivation realms, they could naturally dominate the Earth's universe during the Age of Chaos. Even in this universe, they could occupy the peak of the entire universe and enjoy most of the offerings of the entire universe. However, in the Earth's universe before the Age of Chaos, they could only be regarded as barely qualified to survive. Moreover, they had to tuck their tails between their legs. If they were not careful, they might encounter an enemy that they could not resist and be completely wiped out. This was not difficult to understand. The Earth's universe before the Age of Chaos was not something that the universe they were born in could compare with. They might be extremely powerful in this universe, and even before they became cultivators, they could injure, down master cultivators. However, the Earth's universe was not the universe they were born in. The mysteries contained in the Earth's universe were not something this universe could compare with. The strength they could exert in the Earth's universe would be greatly restricted. Perhaps they would still be much stronger than their cultivation realms, but it would not be as exaggerated as it was in this universe. In that case, a cultivator who was one realm higher than them could easily defeat them in the Earth's universe. A cultivator who was 2 realms higher than them could instantly wipe them out. There were not many things in the Earth's universe, but there were all kinds of cultivators who were 2 or 3 realms higher than them. They might not be everywhere, but there were tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of them. This was the situation more than 100,000 years ago. After more than 100,000 years of comprehending many mysteries in this world of aura, these dozens of cultivators had made great progress. Among them, the one who made the greatest progress was not Shintuan or heavenly deity, but the divine. Chapter 1202. Over 100,000 years, he had advanced from the peak of the primordial heavenly realm to the early stage of the sage-to-be, from the minor stage of the sage-to-be to the peak of the intermediate stage of the sage-to-be. Even Luo Fan's progress on the transcendence path could not be compared with this speed. The fundamental reason was that he had been a great sage with the highest status in the supreme divine land for tens of billions of years. Because of this identity, his mind had been under tremendous pressure due to the long period of time he had lived, and he had even wanted to kill himself many times. However, after he became a cultivator, the unbearable suffering and mental pressure that made him want to kill himself began to show various magical effects that he had never thought of before. It began to gradually transform into his experience. This rich experience allowed him to be like a fish in water in this boundless cultivation environment that contained all the mysteries that he needed to comprehend. He almost did not encounter any bottlenecks and continued to advance his cultivation realm one realm after another. With all these advantages, in addition to the terrifying power that he possessed that could destroy the entire universe, it would be strange if his progress was slow. However, reaching this level was obviously his limit. If he wanted to advance his cultivation realm and break through the shackles of the intermediate stage of the sage-to-be and reach the advanced stage of the sage-to-be, which was the realm that Luo Fan knew of, he would need to spend a lot of time to cultivate bit by bit and make a breakthrough bit by bit. The accumulation that he had formed over the past tens of billions of years had been completely transformed into his cultivation realm in the past hundreds of thousands of years. Although he had lived for tens of billions of years, he had lived with the mentality of an ordinary person, not a cultivator. It was already extremely rare for him to reach the peak of the intermediate stage of the sage-to-be and was only one step away from the advanced stage of the sage-to-be. Of course, It was impossible for him to advance his cultivation realm to a level that was completely compatible with the power that he had mastered, except for the divine realm. The other divine realm experts had also made great progress. Almost everyone had crossed a realm. At this moment, there were no cultivators whose cultivation realm was lower than the sage to be in this chi heaven and earth. Among the cultivators who entered this chi heaven and earth, even the one with the lowest cultivation realm had reached the early stage of the sage to be. However, after more than 100,000 years, even the air hostess felt that her comprehension was sufficient. Needless to say, it was even more so for cultivators like them. All of them had even stopped the process of perceiving this chi heaven and earth 10 or 20,000 years ago. Instead, they gathered in different locations and used all kinds of methods to kill time. They would either go into seclusion to cultivate Tao techniques, spar with each other, or even drink tea and discuss wine. All of them viewed the aura that contained endless profundities as nothing in the world, and no one bothered to comprehend it. Seeing them like this, Luo Fan just sighed and waved his hand. The dozens of people instantly disappeared from their original positions and directly appeared in front of him. These dozens of people were originally doing their own things. Suddenly, space and time changed, and they arrived at a completely unfamiliar place. They couldn't help but turn pale with fright. All kinds of treasured lights burst forth from their bodies, dyeing the place they were in colorful light. It looked like a brand new world. After a while, they finally realized who had transferred them here. Each of them was a little embarrassed as they withdrew their magical powers and bowed to Luo Fan, greeting the immortal elder. You're wasting your time here. I'll give you two choices. First, I'll send you back now. Second, stay here. When I'm done with my business, I'll bring you into the demon realm. What's your choice? Luo Fan said calmly. He couldn't be bothered to care what their original intentions were, and directly gave them such a choice. When such a choice was presented to the many cultivators present, everyone's expression changed slightly. Although they had all made their choice when they first stepped into this chi heaven and earth, it was a choice made more than 100,000 years ago. After more than 100,000 years, it was impossible for their thoughts to not change. At this moment, to them, it was equivalent to making a new choice. Luckily, they were all decisive people. Fortunately, they were all decisive people. Although Luo Fan's inquiry was very hasty, with their extraordinary thinking ability, countless thoughts flashed through their minds in just a moment, allowing them to clearly understand the pros and cons. Thus, they split into two sides. One side was led by the heavenly god, Shentuan, and Shangsheng. There were a total of 10 cultivators. The rest, led by Go Lakun, included the remaining dozens of people. Among them, the heavenly god and the others bowed to Luo Fan and said, "We're willing to follow Immortal Elder to the demon realm." The remaining people bowed in shame and said, "Our strength is meager. Following Immortal Elder will only be a burden. We don't dare to do so. We're willing to stay in this universe and protect Immortal Elder's path of retreat." Luo Fan didn't care what their reasons were. After listening to their choices, he nodded and said, "This is your choice. Don't regret it in the future." Then, he waved his hand, and an invisible wind enveloped the dozens of cultivators who wanted to stay in this universe. Without a sound, the dozens of cultivators disappeared from this chi heaven and earth. When they reappeared, they had returned to the cultivation country and appeared in front of the Shintoin's cave. The location was exactly the same as when they were captured by the child creation god. For this universe, as long as a few years had passed, there would be huge changes. Now that hundreds of thousands of years had passed, the changes were already earth-shattering. Go Lakun and the others who had just returned were too much to take in. After understanding a little, they quickly dispelled the disappointment of not being able to follow the immortal elders to see the new universe. The chi heaven and earth that they had been in for the past hundreds of thousands of years was the best cultivation holy land. After staying there for hundreds of thousands of years, their strength naturally couldn't be caught up by any cultivator in this universe. On the contrary, after hundreds of thousands of years, Their cultivation realm was even more outstanding and powerful than the rest of the universe. For an ordinary universe, leaving for hundreds of thousands of years was considered to be a reappearance. Due to the impermanence of the world, they wouldn't be able to regain their original status. However, for this universe that could easily live for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, or even eternal life, although hundreds of thousands of years wasn't short, it wasn't enough for the entire universe to completely forget about Go-Lakun and the others. Very soon, after regaining contact with the outside world, they relied on their identity, their own strength, and their own achievements to regain control of the cultivation camp and obtain the worship of almost the entire universe. This kind of development finally made them completely dispel the doubts about whether their original decision was correct. Instead, it was a kind of inexplicable satisfaction. Under this kind of satisfaction, their cultivation realm actually improved a little without them realizing it. Although this kind of improvement was so insignificant compared to the improvement they felt in the Chi heaven and earth in the past hundreds of thousands of years. After all, they had already left that place. This kind of improvement was quite rare, and it was enough to make them quite satisfied. Everyone has their own path. Perhaps our path is to stay in this universe and enjoy the worship of countless living beings, instead of going to a new universe to explore the unknown. After Go-Lakun regained control of the peerless authority, such a thought flashed in his mind. He gazed into the distance. His eyes seemed to pass through the barrier of endless time and space. He saw that huge vortex, the huge door, and what existed in it. It made him feel an inexplicable reverence, and he felt a great pressure on his soul. Suddenly, Go-Lakun's heart trembled. How could this be? His expression changed greatly, and the aura on his body fluctuated violently. The cave residence he was in, which was many times more advanced than his original cave residence, was instantly smashed into pieces. The powerful force swept out, and even the land within a radius of hundreds of miles was completely turned into nothingness. After everything changed, Go-Lakun's whole body floated in the air, and the expression on his face kept changing. There seemed to be a kind of regret, and also seemed to be a kind of helplessness intertwined on his face. At the same time, he felt that on the continent of this cultivation country, there were dozens of places quite far away from each other, with violent aura fluctuations breaking out. Although none of the changes that were as intense as his and directly destroyed the entire cave, all of them were abnormal, reflecting the unusual changes that existed in the minds of those who existed. So they also felt it. Go-Lakun let out a long breath, inexplicably feeling a sense of relief. This expression of his was like the expression of a white-collar worker who found out that his bonus had been completely deducted, and suddenly found out that the bonus of all his colleagues had also been deducted. The reason why Go-Lakun had such changes, the reason why his aura fluctuated like this, and the reason why his mood was so shaken, was not because he had been plotted against, nor was it because the original vested interests of this cultivation country were unhappy that he had regained his high position, and so they came to make things difficult for him. It was because he had obtained benefits that he could not have imagined. At this moment, in the depths of his soul, outside of his origin of life, a strange brand appeared out of thin air. This brand was so complicated and mysterious that he could not imagine it. It seemed to contain all the mysteries between heaven and earth and the universe, and contained infinite mysteries that belonged to cultivation that he could and could not imagine. This was not the most important thing. Most importantly, although this brand was not in the shape of a human, when he saw it, all he could think of was a human figure, a calm and unfathomable person that filled him with boundless reverence, and made him feel that he was a great existence that could not be compared to even one of his fingers, even if billions of people were added together. That was the immortal master that he had met not long ago, Luo Fan. Go-Lakun was already a mid-tier sage-to-be, and his cultivation realm was not much weaker than that of the divine deity and Shun Tun. His thinking ability was outstanding, and there was no need to doubt his deduction ability. The moment he saw this brand and sensed its aura, he knew what this brand was all about. This imprint was basically an endless mystery that he received in that instant after seeing the immortal elder's figure. Because he himself was completely unable to comprehend it, unable to understand it, but because this mystery was too deep, too mysterious, too profound, it would definitely not dissipate into thin air. Therefore, it condensed into such an imprint in the depths of his soul, outside of his life source. One contained endless mysteries, enough for him to comprehend for an eternity. It was a miraculous imprint that allowed him to raise his cultivation to an unimaginable level. Such a benefit naturally made Go-Lakun overjoyed. But at the same time that he was overjoyed, he also understood exactly what kind of great opportunity he had missed earlier. Just seeing the figure and receiving the mystery was enough to condense such a mysterious brand, enough to support him to comprehend for a long time and raise his cultivation realm to an unimaginable level. If only he could follow by his side. If he could listen to his teachings, how great would the benefits be? It was because of this that Go-Lakun had such a complicated expression. Just now, he was filled with regret, helplessness, and joy, and hatred. Just as his expression changed, his eyes suddenly narrowed, and the regret in his eyes intensified. But he did not stop moving. He raised his hand and sent a message to a certain position. Then his body drilled into the ground. With a wave of his hand, he constructed an extremely mysterious array around his body. He created a small kiliacosm out of thin air. Then he chose a spot in this small kiliacosm and sat down cross-legged. He closed his eyes and made the best use of his time to comprehend the mysterious brand that appeared out of thin air in the depths of his soul, outside of his origin of life. The reason why he was so anxious was very simple. Just now, he suddenly realized that the brand seemed to have become a little illusory. Although this trace was extremely insignificant, and even the most accurate technological instruments could not detect it, it would be completely ignored. However, it was still dissipating, and it represented that if he continued to delay, then the profundities he would be able to comprehend from the brand would become lesser and lesser. So Go-Lakun couldn't help but be anxious about this. As for why he was even more regretful, it was even simpler. If this brand was eternal, it meant that although his decision to leave Luo-Fan had missed a great opportunity, it was enough for him to cultivate to a very high realm after all. But after all, it was enough for him to cultivate to an extremely high realm, so he did not return empty-handed. Although it was enough to make him regret it, it was still within his acceptable range. And now, this brand was not eternal, but would gradually dissipate with the passage of time, which meant that what he had obtained was time-limited. It was very likely that it would disappear before he could fully comprehend it. It was just a temporary gain. Comparing the two, it was easy to imagine how much of a blow it was to him. After entering into the comprehension of the brand, Go-Lakun immediately began to calculate how long this brand could exist according to the speed at which it dissipated. With this calculation, he felt a little more at ease. At this rate of dissipation, this mysterious imprint could exist for at least 1,000,000 years. If he thought about it more boldly, it would not be a problem for this brand to last for 8 to 9 million years. Such a long time was indeed long enough for Go-Lakun, who had just set foot on the path of cultivation for hundreds of thousands of years. Although it was not an eternity, it was long enough. I wonder if I can fully comprehend the mysteries of this brand before it dissipates. Go-Lakun thought. However, when he really began to comprehend the mysteries of this brand, he realized how naive he was. He knew that the opportunity he had missed before was still beyond his imagination. However, this was a matter for the future. Right now, Go-Lakun was still very naive and happy. Similar to Go-Lakun, the other cultivators who returned to the cultivation countries also found the mysterious brand in the depths of their souls, outside of their life source. However, according to the difference in their eyesight, the brand they received was somewhat clear and some were blurry. Some were big and some were small. These brands were indeed, as Go-Lakun had guessed. When they saw Luo-Fan's figure, they naturally received the various mysteries contained in his figure. However, because they could not understand such mysteries at all, and because these mysteries were too profound and mysterious, they would not dissipate on their own. Therefore, they condensed into one in the depths of their souls and formed these kinds of brands. The appearance of this brand was hundreds of millions of times worse than the brand of sage that was condensed after a cultivator saw a sage, but the formation principle was the same. According to the name of the brand of a sage, such a brand could be called the brand of a town master. Chapter 1203. Such an imprint was formed by many mysteries contained in Luo Fan's body. At this moment, it contained almost all of his past cultivation achievements. If someone could completely comprehend it and integrate it for their own use, then even if that person could not grow to be as powerful as him, they would certainly have a deep understanding of powerful cultivators at his level. Unfortunately, this was unlikely, because Luo Fan was not a saint. The Tao Master imprint condensed by the mysteries of his body could not be eternal like the imprint of a saint. No matter what changes it encountered, no matter how long it passed, it would not be damaged, and it would not be weaker than it was at the beginning. His Tao Master imprint would not only be condensed differently according to one's eyesight. In theory, if one's eyesight was good enough, he would naturally be able to integrate all the mysteries contained in his body into the Tao Master imprint. But that was only in theory. Normally, if one wanted to reach this step and integrate all the mysteries into the Tao Master imprint, he would need to have eyesight that was close to the Tao Master realm. Clearly, with such eyesight, the Tao Master's imprint was no longer of much use to him. In addition to the number of imprints contained in the condensing process, more importantly, because it was a Tao Master imprint, it was at a much lower level than a Saint imprint. Such an imprint was not as stable as a Saint imprint, and it did not have the almost indestructible characteristic of a Saint imprint. Therefore, such an imprint would continue to dissipate over time. Even if the speed of dissipation was not too fast, it was the kind of dissipation that could not be stopped or eliminated. Once this kind of dissipation occurred, it naturally meant that the mysteries contained in the Tao Master imprint were beginning to be incomplete. The imprint itself was already incomplete. It was naturally impossible to completely comprehend all the past cultivation achievements contained in Luo Fan's body through this imprint. Therefore, in theory, the Tao Master imprint could indeed allow a cultivator to improve their cultivation realm to a level close to Luo Fan's. But it was only in theory. In reality, it was almost impossible. In this aspect, it was similar to the mark of a sage. The sage imprint also contained the profound and unfathomable way of the sage. If he could completely comprehend it, becoming a saint would not be a problem. However, in order to fully comprehend it and obtain the way of the sage, one must have the ability to comprehend the sage realm. Although the Tao Master's imprint had all kinds of restrictions, however, the fact that Luo Fan was able to condense a Tao sovereign imprint in the depths of his soul after observing his figure meant that his essence had been sublimated compared to before. This meant that his cultivation direction was correct. Just as Go Lacun and the others were condensing the Tao Master's imprint in the depths of their souls, Luo Fan, who was in the center of the huge vortex, suddenly moved slightly, and an inexplicable expression appeared on his face. However, at this moment, he felt an incomparably mysterious connection between himself and the dozens of people who were at the level of ants to him. But in essence, they were absolutely not weak. Through this connection, although he could not completely sense the specific thoughts of these wills, he could sense the aura of these wills and their intense emotional fluctuations. They actually condensed the Tao Master's imprint. Such a thought flashed through his mind. There was a kind of surprise in his heart, but also a kind of inexplicable joy. After understanding where these connections came from, he had a clearer feeling about those people. He could even faintly feel that they had obtained some kind of understanding from his Tao Master's imprint. What they had gained from it. Sure enough, but even the Tao Master's imprint can have such a reaction. What about the sage's imprint? After a moment of joy, Luo Fan's expression became a little solemn. His Tao Master's imprint was enough to let him have such a clear sense of those cultivators who had received the imprint. Then it would be even more powerful. Of course, The even more incredible sage's imprint could not be worse than his Tao Master's imprint. The feeling that appeared between the imprint and its owner would only be stronger and more obvious. It was even possible to completely grasp all the changes in the mind of the cultivator who had received the imprint through such a connection, and feel all the thoughts of the cultivator. This, of course, was nothing. But don't forget at this moment, in the depths of Luo Fan's divine soul, there was the existence of the sage's imprint. And it was not just one imprint, but the product of the 7 sages' imprints. Although he had taken these imprints from the memory of the god of time during the Dharma ending age, and it could be considered as a transfer of hands, it was still the sage's imprint after all. Now, he was not at all confident that such a transfer could isolate the perception of the sage. If such a guess was true, then all his thoughts, all his will, all his perception would not be completely in the perception of the 7th sage, and all his secrets, all his desires, would not be exposed in front of them without any concealment. Such a thought made Luo Fan shudder, and there was an inexplicable panic in his heart. However, this panic only lasted for a moment. After a moment, all kinds of panic and all kinds of emotions turned into a kind of helplessness. The sage knows everything, and there is nothing they don't know. I am still in the universe on Earth. If they want to know my thoughts, why do they need to borrow the connection between the imprint and the body? They just need to think about it, and they can know everything. What difference does it make whether I have the sage's imprint or not? In Luo Fan's mind, there was such an almost desperate thought. This feeling, which was close to fate and despair, had produced a powerful and unparalleled spiritual pressure on Luo Fan. It made him feel as if there were 7 invisible big hands covering the sky and the earth, covering all the directions he could walk. However, after all, he had already reached the exceptional realm of Tao Master, and his cultivation had long reached the level of exceptional realm. Soon, he completely dispelled this powerful and almost desperate pressure, and his mind returned to a clear state. For the fact that there was no way to change it, thinking too much about it was just asking for trouble, and a wise person would not do so. Go Lakun and the others were not the only practitioners who had condensed Luo Fan's Tao Master imprint in the depths of their souls. Not long after them, the divine realm deity, Shun Tun, and the others who stayed in the Aura world also condensed the Tao Master imprint in the depths of their souls at almost the same time. However, compared to the Tao Master imprint of Go Lakun and the others, the Tao Master imprint in the depths of their souls was more complete than the one condensed by Go Lakun. It was more clear. Moreover, more importantly, these Tao Master imprints would not dissipate. Although they did not have the charm of eternity, they seemed to be endless and had a feeling that they would never disappear. The reason was very simple. Because at this moment, Luo Fan was in front of them. They did not need to rely on their memories to condense these imprints. Instead, they could directly receive the mysteries contained in Luo Fan's body through their eyes. After a long time, these mysteries began to condense into Tao Master imprints. During this process, it was constantly replenished and strengthened by the profound mysteries that surged into his eyes. As a result, it became more and more complete and clearer. Because of this, it also possessed an endless charm. Although it was constantly dissipating, it could be continuously replenished through his eyes, making up for the exhaustion caused by the passage of time. Such an unexpected gain. For the divine realm deity, Shun Tun, and the others who stay behind, it was really a shocking joy. In an instant, the faint hesitation in the hearts of the 10 of them was completely dispelled, replaced by an indescribable fear and joy. They even faintly felt a sense of schadenfreude for Go Lakun and the others who had left the Aura world. In particular, those who had made the decision to stay in this universe for the first time more than 100,000 years ago, but when they made the final decision this time, they chose to follow Luo Fan to the new universe. They were extremely grateful for their decision. The number of cultivators who stayed here was different from when they first made the decision. Of course, there were cultivators who changed sides and joined them. In fact, it was not just cultivators who changed sides and joined them. There were also cultivators who had originally decided to follow Luo Fan to the new universe. Because of the torment of more than 100,000 years, they changed their minds and joined another camp. They decided to stay in this universe and accept offerings from almost the entire universe. One could imagine that those cultivators who had originally decided to join this camp must now be extremely regretful. When all of them condensed the Tao Master imprints in the depths of their divine souls, Luo Fan also sensed the existence of their wills. Moreover, unlike Golakun, they could only vaguely sense auras and emotional fluctuations. When it came to the heavenly gods and the others, he could clearly sense every single thought that passed through their minds. This was very normal. The divine realm deity and the others who stayed in front of Luo Fan could receive the mysterious replenishment from his body at all times, causing the Tao Master imprints to grow endlessly. It had a charm that would never be exhausted, but the effect was relative. Naturally, because of this, Luo Fan's perception of the Tao Master imprints in the depths of their divine souls became clearer and more obvious. According to this deduction, the more powerful sage imprints might really be able to transmit all the minds, thoughts, and psychological activities of the people who receive the imprints back. Luo Fan sighed and said indifferently to the crowd, "The imprints in the depths of your divine souls are my Tao Master imprints. As long as you see me, they will naturally condense. They contain all the techniques and mysteries that I can teach you. After obtaining these imprints, I have nothing else to teach you. You can cultivate on your own." After saying this, he did not bother to care about them anymore. With a wave of his hand, he sent them away again. However, this time, he did not send them too far away. He just did not let them get close to him, although he did not care much about them. And even if they stayed here, he would not feel uneasy or unsafe. However, what he needed to do next was to continue to understand the aura contained in this world, and the things that were condensed from the auras of the cultivators whose realms were beyond his. Apart from the 54 areas that were suspected to be formed by the auras of the sages, these were the only places he lacked in this entire world of auras. No cultivator would let go of the mysteries of cultivation that contained things that they could not understand, but were qualified to understand, let alone Luo Fan, who regarded cultivation as almost his everything. For the sake of cultivation, he did not care whether he was on Earth or in other places in the universe. For this wonderful cultivation place placed in front of him, before he squeezed out all the value in it and completely understood all the mysteries that he could understand, it was absolutely impossible for him to leave. Even if he might be delayed here for hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years, he would not hesitate to do so. Compared with the previous 10,000 years of understanding those insignificant mysteries of the Tao Master realm, the number of mysteries he understood this time was less, but because they were more difficult and obscure, his speed of understanding was slower. However, even though it took him a long time to learn, these mysteries were mysteries that surpassed his cultivation level. Therefore, his harvest was much more than that of the previous 10,000 years. As he entered this state of understanding, his aura began to slowly spread out without any concealment, gradually forming a strange world around his body. This world was extremely mysterious, as if it was a boundless universe. It also seemed to be a world with a round sky and a square earth. It was extremely mysterious and strange, like a dreamy light and shadow. At this time, Luo Fan was at the exceptional realm of Tao Master. His aura was so grand that if it spread out without reservation, it would fill the entire universe. That was absolutely not a problem. Even after such an aura filled the entire universe for hundreds of millions of light years, it could still condense into all kinds of virtual images for mortals to see. However, don't forget that this was a huge whirlpool formed by the fragments of the magic treasure of a half-saint. Such a whirlpool could even suppress and decompose the vast aura in the devil realm into such a world of aura. Even the aura of a sage could not be separated from it. In such a mysterious place, although Luo Fan's aura was grand and vast, It could not break through the barrier of this whirlpool. Therefore, after a change of the aura around Luo Fan's body, it condensed into a solid body, forming a fixed world in front of the crack of the huge door. At first glance, this world seemed to have a round sky and a square earth. Although the earth was not too suppressed by the surrounding aura, it was only tens of thousands of miles. There were high mountains, rivers, plains, hills, forests, and grasslands. Everything was there, showing a world that was more complete and normal than anyone could have imagined. However, as long as one took a closer look, one would know that the world with a round sky and square earth was only a small part of this world. Above the earth, where there was originally only a sky, was a seemingly boundless starry sky. The galaxy vortexes in the starry sky densely dotted the entire starry sky. At a glance, one could tell that it was different from the ordinary starry sky, but it was a boundless and mysterious universe like the universe on Earth after it was broken. It was a boundless universe like the universe on this trial path. And like other things in this world of aura, this world was constantly developing in a way that the flow of time was extremely accelerated. It had faintly integrated with this world of aura, becoming a part of this world of aura. This was a matter of course. This world of aura was originally formed by the decomposition and reconstruction of the aura of the devil realm under the effect of the vortex. It itself was just an aura, and Luo Fan's aura was also an aura. Naturally, it would be affected by the vortex and would naturally undergo similar changes as those auras. After Luo Fan's aura became such a world, it began to undergo various subtle changes as Luo Fan comprehended the many things in this world of aura. This change was not very obvious, but it was extremely resolute. This made the world of aura become more and more complete and bigger. At the beginning, this world of aura was only tens of thousands of miles in radius. However, as time passed, it began to gradually grow, gradually suppressing the various things formed by the surrounding aura. The area it occupied became wider and wider, from tens of thousands of miles to hundreds of thousands of miles, and then from hundreds of thousands of miles to hundreds of thousands of miles. This change clearly meant that Luo Fan was constantly improving, and that his comprehension of those things was gradually on the right track. Of course, he was facing the world of aura formed by the aura of everything in the entire devil realm after all. Even a sage could only occupy a small part of such a world. Of course, the world of aura formed by his aura could not expand indefinitely. When the area of this world expanded to a radius of 9,990,000 miles after 50,000 years, this world of aura finally reached its limit. However, as he comprehended it, it began to become more and more complete and mysterious, but the expansion of the area completely stopped. Chapter 1204. In such a state, Luo Fan's cultivation realm did not make any progress, because he had already reached the exceptional realm of Tao Master. This exceptional realm was not an ordinary exceptional realm, but a genuine exceptional realm of Tao Master. He had reached the end of this realm, the ultimate exceptional realm. Unless he could break through the realm and set foot on the 9 steps, his cultivation realm would not change no matter how long he cultivated and how many mysteries he comprehended. However, no change in his cultivation realm did not mean that his strength had not improved. This was obviously impossible. If his strength had not improved, the world formed by his aura would not have changed so much in the past 50,000 years. In reality, although it was difficult to say that his strength had improved tremendously over the past 50,000 years, he had made great progress in the process of perfecting himself. For Luo Fan, completing the process of his own perfection was not like improving his cultivation realm, making up for any hidden dangers in the past, or making up for any unstable foundation. He had already recultivated so many times in the past that he had already reached the limit of what he could do. Of course, it was impossible to leave behind any hidden dangers or unstable foundation that he could detect now. For the current Luo Fan, there was only one way to complete the process of perfection. That was to completely integrate all his past cultivation achievements with himself, his body, dharma power, perception, aura, divine soul, mind, and so on. Everything. He had started this process many years ago. Previously, he had already achieved great results. His physical body and his mana had already completed such a process. Other than that, his perception, aura, soul, mind, thoughts, and so on, he had also made great achievements in all of them. However, this kind of achievement might be unbelievable to other cultivators, but compared to his physical body and magic power, it was far from enough. They were far behind. This created an imbalance. Thus, there was a feeling of imperfection. Therefore, over the years, Luo Fan had been constantly comprehending all kinds of mysteries in this world of aura that he had never come into contact with before. He used all of them in this aspect, turning all of them into a driving force that completely integrated all of his past cultivation achievements into his own. This process continued for 50,000 years. The results were quite remarkable. The first way was to complete this process. It helped Luo Fan to go one step further towards real perfection. It was his divine soul, body, dharma power, and divine soul. These three were the most practical for a practitioner, the three most realistic ones. In this way, it was naturally the easiest for him to completely integrate his cultivation achievements into them. On this day, when Luo Fan felt that his spirit had completely integrated with all of his past cultivation achievements, he felt that his whole body was suddenly incomparably transparent. An indescribable, wonderful feeling enveloped him. In a trance, he suddenly felt that he was at an indescribable height. Everything in this universe could only be overlooked by him. There were even countless things that would have taken a lot of effort to accomplish in the past. Now, he only needed a thought to accomplish them. Problems that originally required countless steps to solve could be easily bypassed by him and directly saw the answer to the question. An indescribable cycle began to be established between his body, dharma power, and divine soul. An extremely strange feeling suddenly appeared in his mind. His body, his dharma power, and his divine soul. These three seemed to have begun to fuse in a way that was different from the imagination of all living creatures and all cultivators. The three were faintly about to fuse into one and become an existence that could not be described with words. However, this feeling was soon interrupted. This was because at the final juncture of the inexplicable fusion, traces of disharmony were born. Then, this disharmony began to rapidly expand, and the number began to increase rapidly. Very soon, it expanded to the size of a natural moat, completely blocking the fusion of the three. This caused Luo Fan to completely lose the feeling of fusion. After coming back to his senses, Luo Fan could not help but feel that it was a pity. He could feel that this fusion would be an extremely amazing opportunity. If he could truly fuse them into one, it would be infinitely beneficial to him. It would be even more beneficial than stepping on the 9 steps. After he came back to his senses, he understood exactly what the trace of disharmony that appeared at the last moment was. It was clearly because his senses, mind, and various other things hadn't reached true perfection, and he hadn't truly fused with everything he had cultivated in the past. It was precisely because of this lack that his body was not in a state of balance. And this imbalance interrupted the process of complete fusion, causing him to have no choice but to stop this process and make up for it again before he could fuse it again. I'm walking on the right path. After this thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, he once again immersed himself in the state of observation and comprehension that he had experienced for the past 50,000 years. In this state, he gradually forgot the passage of time and everything in the outside world. Time seemed to have no meaning to him. He only knew to constantly understand the various mysteries in this world and continuously turn them into his own resources. This allowed him to continuously fuse all of his past cultivation achievements into everything that he was. The fourth way to complete this kind of fusion was his mind's will. The connection between the mind and the spirit was extremely close. Starting from the spirit, it was very easy to complete this kind of fusion. Another 10,000 years had passed by the time his mind had completely fused with all of his past accomplishments in cultivation. This time, after completing the fusion, Luo Fan only felt that his mind was much clearer, much broader, and much more tenacious. However, there was no wonderful change like when he completed the fusion of the spirit. This was very obvious. Compared to the previous three, the degree of importance of a change in mind was still not as important. However, Luo Fan did not care about this, nor did he waste much time on it. Instead, he continued to comprehend and proceed to the next fusion. The fifth to complete the fusion was his perception. The connection between perception and the mind was even closer than the connection between the mind and the soul, so it only took him another 10,000 years to complete the fusion process. And similarly, when this fusion was completed, Luo Fan only felt that his perception seemed to be very huge. His power had only increased tremendously. However, the feeling of the complete integration of the soul, body, magic power, and so on still did not occur. Just like that, as Luo Fan continued to comprehend the various mysteries contained in this aura, everything in his body gradually completed the process of completely fusing with his cultivation achievements. Everything became part of his physical body, with his magic power. Just like his divine soul, it contained his everything, all of his divine abilities, all of his power. All means, time passed quickly. 10,000 years, 20,000 years, 30,000 years, 40,000 years. One day, after 100,000 years, Luo Fan finally fused all of his thoughts with all of his cultivation achievements. He completed the process of fusing everything he had with all of his cultivation achievements. The instant the fusion was completed, the feeling that had arisen after his spirit, physical body, and magic power had fused together, the feeling that the three were about to fuse into one and turn into an inconceivable and wondrous existence, appeared again. Moreover, this time it appeared. This time, it was even more intense than before. This time, there were many more things that had to be added to this fusion. Not only did it include his spirit, physical body, magic power, but it also included his perception, his mind, his aura, and even the various wonderful space-time in his body. Everything about him was added to this fusion. In this fusion, after it appeared, Luo Fan expelled everything that had fused into his body at the last moment, including the creation godchild. He directly welcomed this fusion in the purest state. The creation godchild was originally sleeping in Luo Fan's body, absorbing the harvest he had gained from comprehending this aura world in the past 100,000 years. Suddenly, the environment changed, and he could not help but wake up. As soon as he woke up, he was shocked. This was because he found that he was still in this aura world, but there were many different kinds of things around him. Many of these things were things that he had seen in his master's body, but most of them were things that he did not recognize. At this time, whether he knew them or not, they were all quietly floating in the void. And in the middle of these things, his master, the supreme existence that had created her, was floating at this time. There was a kind of incomparably familiar and yet completely strange feeling in his body, and it was becoming stronger and stronger. Thanks to this feeling, the already supreme master became even nobler, more profound, more mysterious, more unbelievable, and more supreme. What's going on? Could it be that the master has become a sage? The creation godchild thought nonsensically. At the thought of becoming a sage, she could not help but let out a thumping sound, and her eyes were filled with disbelief. She suddenly understood where that strange and familiar feeling came from. That strange and familiar feeling was clearly the feeling that she had felt in this aura world in the past 100,000 years. It was the feeling that came from the 54 different places that were suspected to be formed by the aura of the sage. No way. The master has really become a sage. She was instantly ecstatic, but soon she found that it was impossible, because the feeling that Luo Fan gave her was somewhat similar to the feeling that the 54 places gave her, but in terms of intensity, it was tens of thousands of times weaker. Comparing the two, it was like comparing a candle flame to the sun. They seemed to have the same characteristics, but the gap between them was like heaven and earth. And such a gap was obviously not the gap that should appear when one became a sage. Even if he denied the possibility that Luo Fan was becoming a sage, the creation godchild was not disappointed because of this. After all, no matter whether he became a sage or not, the changes that happened to Luo Fan in front of him must have obtained great benefits. Since he had obtained benefits, what was there to be disappointed about? Hey, why is there this brand in the depths of my will? Suddenly, the creation godchild was slightly surprised. He felt that there was something that was not there before in the depths of his will. This thing was extremely mysterious, and the principles contained in it were unimaginably deep. Most importantly, the feeling that was transmitted from it was clearly the feeling that came from Luo Fan. In an instant, the creation godchild knew that this brand was obtained from his master, and it contained the infinite mysteries of his master. Could it be? This is the cultivation brand with the same essence as the legendary sage brand? The creation godchild was overjoyed. When Luo Fan was chatting with the air hostess, he once talked about the sage brand. And this was certainly not a secret for the creation godchild, who was Luo Fan's magic treasure. Therefore, the creation godchild also knew how the sage brand was produced. He knew what kind of existence it was. Now that he found this brand in the depths of his will, naturally, he instantly knew what was going on with this brand. After finding this, he hurriedly moved the air hostess, who was sorting out her worldview in her body. Sorting out one's unique worldview was an extremely complicated work, even if the air hostess had already grasped the key. In a short period of more than 200,000 years, there was still not much progress, let alone starting to recultivate. Therefore, at this time, the air hostess could still be interrupted at any time and could understand what was happening outside at any time. Suddenly being moved out by the creation godchild, the air hostess was shocked at first, and then she quickly saw the situation around her and also saw Luo Fan, who was floating in the innumerable debris and undergoing some mysterious changes. Seeing him, she couldn't help but be surprised, and then she was delighted. As a magic treasure, how could the air hostess not think of what she could think of? However, he soon found out that something extremely subtle and mysterious was happening to Luo Fan's body. It was something that was extremely beneficial to him. Just at the moment when she was feeling happy, her expression changed again. In an instant, she found that a strange brand was condensing out of thin air in the depths of her divine soul. And this brand gave her the same feeling as the Luo Fan in front of her. That aura, that feeling, that subtle telepathy, everything was exactly the same as the Luo Fan in front of her. This is the brand of the Taoist master. It can actually condense such a brand. After knowing the truth of this brand, the air hostess couldn't help but smile excitedly, and she couldn't help but murmur. Although she was much weaker than the creation godchild, her knowledge was not comparable to that of the creation godchild. After all, the creation godchild was a magic treasure refined by Luo Fan in this universe, while the air hostess was born in the Age of Sages. She cultivated until the Age of Chaos ending, and then returned to the Earth universe before the world was broken through the Transcendence Road from the Age of Chaos ending. And from the Earth universe, she was brought to this universe by Luo Fan. Her rich experience and knowledge were more than 10,000 times greater than that of the creation godchild. What the creation godchild couldn't think of, she thought of in an instant. Through the appearance of such a brand, she knew the essence of this brand, and what an incredible achievement it was for Luo Fan to naturally condense such a brand for those who saw him. And to be able to do this now, which he couldn't do before, how great of a progress he had made. This was the bearing of a sage. How could she not be excited when she knew this? How could she not be so excited that she couldn't control herself? With a slight thought, the air hostess raised her hand and gently waved it. The many miscellaneous items around her were instantly absorbed into the body of the creation godchild. Then, she pulled the creation godchild's hand and hurriedly retreated. In the blink of an eye, they had retreated hundreds of millions of miles away. Floating in the void, she quietly looked at Luo Fan, who was floating in front of the huge portal. At this moment, the world of aura around Luo Fan that was completely separated from the outside world gradually collapsed. It turned from a seemingly real world into a mysterious light and shadow, and then gradually became invisible. It gradually shrank inwards, and in the end, all of it entered his body and disappeared without a trace. However, even though the world of aura had shrunk, it didn't mean that the surroundings had calmed down. On the contrary, when Luo Fan completely withdrew all of his aura into his body, the intense changes in the surroundings had only just begun. The world of aura around Luo Fan that was originally formed from the aura of the demon world suddenly collapsed. Everything that had been decomposed and transformed by the huge vortex began to turn back into various auras, and they began to mix together again, forming the extremely strange, neutral, and peaceful aura that contained destruction. It was a strange aura so rich that it could even affect one's vision. No matter what level of aura these things were formed from, be it immortal path, primordial unity, innate grand luo, or demi-saint, or even the aura of those who had stepped onto the stairs or were suspected to be the aura of a sage, they all reverted to their fundamental appearance, which was that invisible and intangible aura, and reassembled into the appearance that had seeped out from the huge gap in the door. The changing distance started from where Luo Fan hovered and continued to spread in all directions. Chapter 1205. However, at this moment, Air Maiden's surroundings were suddenly shrouded by an invisible existence. This invisible existence completely isolated her from all the changes in the outside world. Even if the aura world outside was collapsing and being destroyed, it could not affect her and God Creation Boy, who was held by her. However, the collapse of the aura world did not slow down because of this. Instead, it continued to spread in all directions like before, gradually turning the aura world surrounding the huge portal into a neutral and peaceful aura mixed with a destructive aura. It formed an unpredictable light and shadow that seemed illusory and real, filling the portal in the center of the vortex. Among these auras, there were 10 locations where the same situation happened to Air Maiden. There was also an invisible existence that shrouded a certain living being, completely isolating them from any external influences that they might encounter, so that they would not be hurt by the collapse of the aura world. These living beings were obviously divine gods, Shintuan and the others. At this moment, they were looking at the changes around them in confusion. They had been comprehending Luo Fan's Tao Master imprint all these years and comprehended the many mysteries within it. Just when they felt that their cultivation realm was soaring like a rocket, they suddenly found that the surrounding world had completely disappeared after a change, and they were shrouded by an indescribable light and shadow. They were in an incomparably wonderful void. This feeling naturally made them completely confused. In particular, it was even more so when their knowledge was far inferior to that of Air Maiden and the others. As for the invisible existence that protected them around them, they did not know what it was. Air Maiden glanced at them, and then looked at Luo Fan, who was floating in the center of the huge portal, to see the various inexplicable changes that were happening to him. At this time, Luo Fan was quietly floating in the air. There was not a trace of aura coming out from his body. At first glance, his entire body looked like it was floating in the air. At first glance, he looked like a lifeless stone statue. However, if one took a closer look, they would find that he was not a lifeless stone statue. Although there was no aura, no movement, no activity, the sense of existence of life was strong beyond imagination. Anyone who stared at him for more than a second would feel that he was the origin of life, the ancestor of all living beings in the universe. The mysteries and characteristics of all living beings could be found in him. Furthermore, all the mysteries of the universe could be found in that body, whether it was living or non-living, even the supreme great Tao in the dark. All traces of its existence could be found on that person's body. This feeling was not fixed. Instead, It was growing with the passage of time. At first, perhaps it was just a little taste, but as time passed, this feeling became stronger and stronger. In the end, it even had a tendency to completely replace all of one's senses, completely changing one's worldview, transferring a person's understanding of the universe to this body. Of course, this was only the case for ordinary people. For the space maiden who had started to sort out her worldview, she naturally wouldn't go to such an extent. However, even if it hadn't reached that point, the space maiden could still feel the Tao Master Brand in the depths of her divine soul. As time passed, as she observed Luo Fan's body, it became clearer, more complete, more stable, and more mysterious. If it had just been formed, the Tao Master Brand could only exist for millions of years. Later on, the Tao Master Brand even reached the point where it could continue to exist even if the Space Maiden had not seen Luo Fan for hundreds of millions of years. This kind of stable growth had already reached an unimaginable level. The Space Maiden finally felt completely relieved after discovering this. The change of the Tao Master Brand was obviously corresponding to the change that was happening to Luo Fan's body. From the fact that the Tao Master Brand had become more complete, more stable, and clearer, it was obvious that what was happening to Luo Fan was a good thing. It was a good thing that was extremely beneficial to his cultivation. The mysterious existence that enveloped the Space Maiden was obviously set up by Luo Fan. Although the world that had collapsed at the center of the vortex was only a world with an aura, it was still a powerful and mysterious world. Although the collapse of this world wouldn't destroy everything in this world like the true collapse of the world, it would definitely cause great harm to the many cultivators in this world. This kind of injury might not be too fatal, but it would definitely not disappear so easily. For Luo Fan, it only took a thought for him to protect them from such harm. Under such circumstances, he naturally would not be stingy with his thoughts to protect them. While he protected them, the changes in Luo Fan's body had already reached the final stage. In his body, his spirit, body, magic power, Tao fruit, perceptual mind, thoughts, aura, sea of consciousness, and so on, everything had entered the final stage of fusion. This time, there was no disharmony that could stop this fusion. The various existences completely fused together in the end, forming an indescribable whole. It formed an unimaginably mysterious existence. A feeling of flawlessness and perfection filled his heart. In a trance, the entire universe seemed to have become a world in his palm, a world of his own, 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 a world of his own creation. There was a feeling that he could adjust the laws of the universe at will. He could adjust everything in the universe at will. There was a feeling that he was omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in the universe. Is this the feeling of chaotic origin Tao fruit? Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes and murmured. At this moment, his eyes flashed with an indescribable light that seemed to contain all the principles of the universe. It contained the supreme profundity that could allow any cultivator to comprehend for a lifetime, and it contained the supreme profundity that could lead a cultivator to the highest realm. With a slight thought, the demonic aura that surged out from the gap of the huge door instantly condensed into a small, palm-sized world of aura in front of him. It was the same as before at the center of the vortex. The aura that enveloped the huge door was the same as the world of aura. There were also 54 places that were suspected to be the aura of the demonic world. As the countless auras condensed, a huge amount of aura began to seep out from the huge door again. At this moment, Luo Fan gently patted the door, and the endless information was instantly blocked. It completely stayed in the door and could no longer flow out. It was as if the gap of the huge door had completely disappeared. The current Luo Fan was like a true sage in this universe. He was omniscient, and omnipotent. These auras were the auras of the demonic world. But after all, they had appeared in this universe, so they were naturally under his control. He could naturally condense them into a world of aura at will, and he could naturally block the gap of the huge door so that the auras could no longer flow in. The reason why he could have such a power that was close to that of a true sage in this universe was very simple. Because this universe, in essence, it was only a great thousand world. Although it was many times more powerful and terrifying than the many great thousand worlds that Luo Fan had seen before, it was still a great thousand world after all. Compared to a true perfect world, it was still many times worse. And for Luo Fan, who had already integrated everything into one, there was no longer any difference between his divine soul, physical body, magic power, aura, and so on. As long as he stayed a little longer, he would be able to control everything in this great thousand world, as if this great thousand world was created by him. The time that Luo Fan stayed in this universe was not 1 or 2 years, but hundreds of thousands of years. He had long reached the shortest time that allowed him to control everything in this universe, as if he was the creator of this universe. Therefore, he had such a remarkable ability and power in this universe, with such a method. However, it was a pity that this method was limited to this universe. After leaving this universe, he would enter other great thousand worlds. He also needed a period of time to familiarize himself with it before he could use it again. And it was absolutely impossible for him to enter a perfect world like the Earth universe. The perfect world had exceeded the scope of effect of this strange characteristic of his. However, he had to raise his cultivation realm by a few levels before he could make use of this trait. If he wanted to make use of this trait perfectly, to the point where he could be omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in a perfect world like the vast thousand worlds for a period of time, he would have to at least attain the fruit of origin of Tao. Luo Fan floated there, raised his hand, and gently shook it. In the depths of his divine soul, the invisible and intangible sage imprint that could not be touched, grasped, or affected at all appeared in his hand. The complexity and profundity of this sage imprint was hundreds of millions of times more powerful than his Taoist imprint. Even in the hands of Luo Fan, the mysterious aura that radiated from the imprint had already enveloped the entire universe, making all living creatures in the entire universe feel a supreme and strange existence appear in a certain location in this universe. Some powerful cultivators even thought that some supreme magic treasure had appeared and were bent on finding the traces of these magic treasures. Thank you for your guidance over the years, sages and supremes. Now that I want to prove my Tao, I hope that you can take back the imprint. Luo Fan thanks you. Luo Fan let go of the imprint, which floated in the void, and he kowtowed to it in the void. For the first time, the imprint did not have any reaction, as if it was just the most ordinary imprint, just a dead object, and what Luo Fan did was just a useless effort. Luo Fan had already expected this, so he was not surprised. He kowtowed again and said, "Thank you for your guidance over the years, sages and supremes. Now that I want to prove my Tao, I hope that you can take back the imprint." Luo Fan thanks you. He repeated this process again and again until he had repeated it 9 times. Only then did an indescribable change occur. An extremely strange sigh came from the void, and then the imprint shook slightly, gradually turning from solid to intangible. From existence to non-existence, it disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye, as if it had never appeared. The whole process was so mysterious that even Luo Fan could not imagine or understand it. The imprint was still in front of him at this moment, real and solid. There wasn't the slightest bit of illusion, but in the next instant, the brand disappeared without a trace. There were no fluctuations that he could understand in the whole process, no abnormalities in time, no changes in speed, no changes in laws. Everything was gone. From the looks of it, it was as if the brand had never been here, and the brand that he had sensed and seen for so many years was just an illusion. This change made Luo Fan instantly know that the person who took away the imprint was definitely a supreme, omnipotent, omniscient, and immortal supreme sage. He was definitely a supreme, omnipotent, omniscient, omniscient, indestructible, eternally indestructible supreme saint. Of course, he did not know which sage it was. After sending the sage imprint away, Luo Fan heaved a sigh of relief, and a relaxed smile appeared on his face. The existence of the imprint was actually not a bad thing for him. This was because the saint's imprint contained endless mysteries, endless principles, and also contained countless secrets of the saint's Tao. It could allow him to comprehend the mysteries of cultivation that would be of great benefit to him, and it could be of great benefit to the improvement of his Tao. Even if the imprint would cause all his thoughts to be contained in his body, all his thoughts and actions would be transmitted through the imprint to the owner of the imprint, which was the few sages. However, this was only secondary. After all, if the sage wanted to know what you were thinking, it would only take a thought. There was no need for the imprint. As for the sage imprint, that could bring him a lot of benefits. The reason why Luo Fan was so determined to send it away was very simple. That was at this moment, everything in his body had already merged into one. Whether it was his spirit, body, supernatural power, will, perception, mind, consciousness, aura, thoughts, and so on, everything had become a complete and perfect whole. Under such circumstances, the sage imprint that existed in the depths of his body was interfering with him. Even if the sage imprint could bring him endless benefits, to him, it was like a golden thorn piercing into his flesh, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. Giving a golden thorn to an ordinary person would naturally bring him many benefits. The gold used to make the golden thorn was naturally something that the person liked, but when the golden thorn pierced into the flesh, the feeling was unimaginable. No matter how valuable the golden thorn was, the person would definitely not be willing to live with a golden thorn. To the current Luo Fan, the sage imprint was like a golden thorn for an ordinary person. Therefore, he wanted to send the sage imprint away. Of course, he couldn't casually throw it away. After all, it was the sage imprint and it was related to the sage. If he casually threw it away, it would be fine if the sage didn't mind. However, if the sage cared and sneezed at him, then he would die and his soul would scatter. That was the reason why the conversation from before occurred. After doing all that, Luo Fan felt relaxed. He felt that the perfect and flawless feeling was getting more and more intense. In a flash, the Air Maiden and the Divine Creation Boy appear before him. Just now, was that the voice of the sage? After arriving, before the Air Maiden could speak, the impatient Divine Creation Boy opened his mouth to ask. This made the Air Maiden's expression change. She quickly held onto the Divine Creation Boy's hand. It was obvious that she was worried about the Air Maiden's impulsive question. That was a sage, an omnipotent sage. How could she casually talk about it? It's okay, it's okay. Since the sage is willing to transmit his voice, he naturally isn't afraid of others finding out. Luo Fan couldn't help but chuckle at the Air Maiden's reaction. These words indirectly acknowledged the Divine Creation Boy's question and confirmed that the sigh from before was the sage's voice. Hearing Luo Fan's confirmation, the Air Maiden's expression changed. She couldn't help but look at Luo Fan with worry. Though hearing the sage's sigh for the first time made her feel strange and open her eyes, because the sigh was a sigh, she became even more worried. Why did the sage sigh? What was this sigh directed at? Would something bad happen to Luo Fan, who was targeted by this sigh? Would the sage be in a bad mood because of this? Would the sage make a move against him? All these thoughts made it hard for her to pretend that nothing had happened. Seeing the Air Maiden's worried expression, Luo Fan grinned and held her hand. Don't worry. There are some things that are useless to worry about. All we can do is be ourselves. We don't have to worry about anything else. In reality, Luo Fan didn't even need to guess. The Taoist imprint that existed deep within the Air Maiden's soul would naturally let him know all of the Air Maiden's thoughts and understand all of his worries. Chapter 1206. Master, madam, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand? The boy creation god finally couldn't help but feel depressed like a duck listening to thunder and asked. Hearing this, Luo Fan and the air hostess couldn't help but laugh. You don't need to understand. When it's time for you to understand, you will naturally understand. In the end, it was Luo Fan who comforted him. Hearing this, the Divine Creation Boy was even more puzzled. He blinked his eyes and finally didn't say anything. At this moment, Luo Fan was already a supreme existence like a sage in this universe. With a single thought, all the changes in the entire universe and all the forces were under his control. With a casual wave of his hand, the aura that pervaded the entire universe was more intense on the side of the science and technology camp, but it was extremely sparse on the side of the cultivation camp. The aura of the demonic realm that almost didn't exist instantly condensed where he was. In the blink of an eye, it completely poured into the small world of aura in his hand, making the world of aura increasingly perfect. After losing the aura of the demonic realm, the entire universe, whether it was the cultivation camp or the science and technology camp, instantly underwent a subtle change. This subtle change was as if the original great inclination towards the science and technology civilization and the cultivation camp had completely disappeared in an instant. Instead, it was replaced by an absolute balance, a balance that a normal universe and a normal heaven and earth should have. This balance caused the rejection of the science and technology civilization on the cultivation camp to completely disappear. It also caused all kinds of special help towards the development of science and technology in the star fields of the science and technology camp to completely disappear. Similarly, in the cultivation camp, in the incomparably huge star fields, a similar change also occurred. The rejection of the science and technology civilization in these regions had completely disappeared. The special help towards the cultivation civilization had also completely disappeared. In other words, the entire universe had completely returned to normal at this time. What the science and technology camp, what the cultivation camp, were just the self-perception of living beings, no longer the division of the rules of the universe. The state of the whole universe had completely become exactly the same as that of the general universe. No matter where the cultivators cultivated, when they needed to suffer a tribulation, there would be a tribulation. But similarly, when the cultivators shouldn't suffer a tribulation, the tribulation would not come. Instead, the tribulation would come. It was no longer as unimaginably strong or unimaginably weak as before. Instead, it was completely normal. In other universes, in other heavens and earth, the same cultivators would encounter the same degree of tribulations as they would encounter the same degree of tribulations. Such a huge change. For all living beings in the entire universe, this was a huge change that caught them off guard. Not only living beings, but the environment of the entire universe was also gradually changing along with this change. Many of the planets that were originally unsuitable for the birth of life, but gave birth to life due to the anomalies in the laws of the universe, were gradually transforming back to their normal state. In other words, they were gradually turning into deserts, and the life on them was gradually dying out. Similarly, in the entire universe, non-humanoid life forms began to give birth to intelligence, and all sorts of strange intelligent life forms began to rise in the universe. These kinds of changes were complicated and mysterious, and almost couldn't be described with words. Luo Fan was almost omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent in this universe. He was completely aware of such a change even before he did it. After doing all this, he did not wait for the result. He raised his hand and pointed gently, and the huge vortex collapsed in an instant. The huge amount of energy that formed the vortex gradually shrank and reorganized itself. In the end, it gradually turned into a strange fragment the size of a palm. It was impossible to tell what material this fragment was made of, and there were no special lines or other changes on it. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary stone. Luo Fan held this strange fragment and carefully stroked it. Then, an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. It's indeed a fragment of a semi-sage magic treasure. Unfortunately, it's still too small. I can't see the original appearance of that semi-sage magic treasure. Without saying much, he raised his hand and patted the fragment directly into the body of the spirit-creating boy. The spirit-creating boy was completely puzzled by what his master was doing. His little brain was working hard to think about the meaning of what his master was doing and what kind of incredible means he was using. All of a sudden, he found that his master had suddenly patted a palm-sized, unusual thing into his body. During the whole process, he did not feel anything at all. He could not even find where the palm-sized strange thing had gone to. This made him turn pale with fright. He touched his body and exclaimed, "Where is it? Where is it? Master, what did you put into my body?" She was so anxious that she was about to cry. Luo Fan flicked her forehead forcefully and said, "Don't be ungrateful. This is a fragment of a semi-sage magic treasure. I will now completely fuse it with your body. Your potential will increase by 100 times. You can go and snicker." Hearing Luo Fan's words, the spirit-creating boy was overjoyed. He finally stopped what he was doing and just giggled. Although the huge whirlpool had returned to its original appearance, Luo Fan did not completely eliminate the effect of the whirlpool. At this moment, the huge portal that was born because of the appearance of the whirlpool was still suspended not far away from Luo Fan. It was still huge, mysterious, and vast. The gap of the portal was still there, but it looked completely the same as before. It was just like the existence of the whirlpool. After so many changes, the divine god and the others naturally saw the root of all the changes, which was the existence of Luo Fan. The moment they saw Luo Fan, in the depths of their souls, the Tao Master imprints that they had spent a lot of time to condense completely collapsed. Then, a more complete, clearer, more stable, and more mysterious Tao Master imprint appeared in the depths of their souls, outside the origin of life. This speed was formed in an instant. Compared to before, when it took a lot of time to condense, it was much faster. The reason for this was obviously very simple. Because Luo Fan had reached true perfection at this time. He was in a flawless state. Because of this perfection, with such a flawless and unhindered state, all of his past achievements and cultivation had been influenced by various factors and had long since become extremely condensed. It was extremely real, but it was no longer as messy as before. It was because of this condensation. Therefore, the moment these practitioners saw Luo Fan, the mysteries that they could not understand naturally condensed into one. In this way, the Tao Master imprint naturally condensed in the depths of their souls. Because of this, it could be seen from the moment the Air Maiden saw Luo Fan. It should be known that the moment the Air Maiden saw Luo Fan, she had already condensed the Tao Master imprint in the depths of her soul. Before this, the Air Maiden had never seen Luo Fan after he had condensed the Tao Master imprint. Of course, this was still a Tao Master imprint after all. It was not as indestructible and immortal as the Saint imprint. Therefore, if they did not see Luo Fan for a long time and did not receive replenishment, such imprints would gradually dissipate and eventually disappear completely. This had been mentioned before, so there was no need to talk about it here. Many practitioners now faced Luo Fan. The reverence in their hearts was many times stronger than before. There was a faint feeling of facing the supreme, absolute truth, or the great Tao. That kind of reverence, that kind of fear, that kind of desire to approach, but also fear in their hearts, and that kind of mentality of not daring to approach made them stay quietly on the side, not daring to speak before Luo Fan summoned them. Luo Fan glanced at them, raised his hand, and gently grabbed them. They were collected into the aura world in his palm. After collecting them, he turned to the Air Maiden and said, "You still need to go into seclusion to sort out your worldview. It's not good to delay any longer. Go back first." The Air Maiden naturally did not care. She nodded and gestured to the Divine Creation Boy. The Divine Creation Boy nodded and turned around, turning into an extremely simple and ordinary creation shrine. The current creation shrine had undergone some very subtle changes compared to before. It faintly felt more stable and more unfathomable. This was obviously the change caused by the integration of the fragment of the semi-sage magic treasure that Luo Fan had obtained. Seeing this, the Air Maiden glanced at Luo Fan, turned around, took a step, and instantly entered the creation shrine. After the Air Maiden entered, the creation shrine shook slightly. It was about to turn back into the Divine Creation Boy. Luo Fan smiled slightly and said, you should also cultivate in seclusion. With that, he raised his hand and pointed. The creation shrine shook slightly, gradually shrank to the size of a palm, and fell into Luo Fan's hand. Holding the creation shrine in one hand and the palm-sized aura world in the other, Luo Fan shook his head, raised his hand, and collected them into his universe in his sleeve. He didn't even want to leave the sage's imprint in his body, so naturally he wouldn't integrate other things into his body like before. Since this was the case, the only thing he could do now was, of course, to put these things into the universe in his sleeve. Fortunately, after that transformation, at this moment, Luo Fan's universe in his sleeve had already become a vast and boundless world. Even if it was very different from this universe, there weren't so many planets and creatures, but in essence, there wasn't too much difference. Such a universe in his sleeve, even if it contained the divine creation boy and the others, it wouldn't be too bad. After doing all this, Luo Fan raised his head and looked somewhere in the void and said faintly, "This friend has been hiding for so long. I wonder if you can show yourself now?" His words spread out, but the surroundings were silent. There was no movement at all. It was as if his words were completely spoken to the void, not to any intelligence, cultivator, or creature at all. If it was an ordinary person, they might wonder if their senses were wrong. But obviously, Luo Fan wasn't an ordinary cultivator, let alone an ordinary person. Seeing that there was no change in the surroundings, he shook his head and sighed, then raised his hand and gently patted the void. In an instant, the entire universe shook slightly, and an indescribable strange wave was born from every inch of the void in the entire universe. It quickly gathered towards the void that his palm was facing, and in the blink of an eye, that void was torn apart, turning that void into a paste. The indescribable chaos, and even the strange gray existence in the gap between heaven and earth and chaos, completely drowned that void. I didn't expect you to only be at the peak of the sage-to-be. Unexpectedly, you can already find me. It seems that I've still underestimated you. At this moment, in that state of paste, there was such a voice full of infinite magnetism, containing endless charm, that almost made people's minds tremble naturally. They were attracted by this voice. They could even construct an incomparably perfect and beautiful male voice in their minds. As this voice appeared, the glue-like state instantly calmed down. The entire process seemed to have stopped in that instant, and there would not be any flow at all. Then, it was as if time flowed backward. That state of paste quickly transformed back to its original state of nothingness, and in a short while, it completely returned to the state of incomparably calm nothingness that it was when Luo Fan patted it. However, compared to the original state of absolute nothingness, at this moment, there was something else there. It was a human figure, a figure in a long robe, with eyebrows like swords, and eyes that seemed to contain the birth and destruction of countless worlds and universes. This person's appearance was perfect to the extreme. If it was said that anyone who heard that voice before would construct an incomparably perfect male appearance in their minds, then when they saw this man's appearance, they would instantly disperse the perfect male that they had constructed and let this man's figure replace the image that they had constructed. This was because the image that they had constructed was far inferior to this man's true appearance. Luo Fan looked at the man and faintly smiled. He then bowed and said, "I was able to comprehend many mysteries of cultivation from the silhouette you left behind. I thank you for your help. Back then, I left traces in countless worlds, and you're the only one who could gain enlightenment from them. This is your ability, so what does it have to do with me?" The figure chuckled and said, "This figure was impressively the one who had left a figure lying on its side in this universe, allowing Luo Fan to witness the birth and death of countless worlds, as well as the birth and death of countless living beings. Moreover, with the help of the mysterious figure, he had deduced the mirror-like rune that was the owner of the shadow. Of course, the moment Luo Fan saw this figure, he also knew that this figure was not the original body of the figure. At most, it was an incarnation or a clone, or even a projection. There was no other reason. Although this figure contained the same aura and the same mysteries as the figure, it was only equivalent to an existence that had set foot on the fourth or fifth step. Although this strength was slightly stronger than Luo Fan before compared to the current Luo Fan, it did not have much of an advantage. If Luo Fan was almost omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in this universe, it was even more impossible for him to compare. With such strength, of course, it was impossible for this figure to be the original body of the figure. No matter what, I have benefited from you, fellow. I will remember this in my heart. May I know how to address you, fellow? Luo Fan only smiled and did not conveniently let the matter go just because the figure said that it was not a kindness. Instead, he said this. Haha, you're a very interesting person. What I'm called is actually not important. You can call me the Honorable One. You should be called Luo Fan. I've observed you for more than 100,000 years, but I really can't figure out how you cultivate and how you can grasp this universe so quickly. Can you tell me? The Honorable One said. When Luo Fan heard this, he just smiled and said, so it turns out that fellow Taoist Zhengzuan was already here when I was cultivating with the help of the traces you left behind. I only discovered fellow Taoist's existence not long ago. I am truly ashamed. As for how I could grasp this universe so quickly, this is a secret of my cultivation that I can't tell you yet. I hope fellow Honorable One can forgive me. A cultivation secret? That's going to be difficult. When the Honorable One heard Luo Fan's words, he could not help but sigh. On his face that could make anyone feel that he was a perfect spokesperson, he frowned slightly and muttered. It was as if he had fallen into a dilemma. At this moment, Luo Fan had already raised his vigilance to the highest level. He quietly stared at the figure in front of him who called himself the Honorable One. Although his expression did not change, he was already prepared to gather the power of the entire universe to destroy him in an instant. The situation he was facing was almost the most dangerous situation he had ever encountered in his life. Even all the dangers he had encountered in the Primordial world, or even the Great Tianyuan world, were nothing compared to the danger he was facing now. Chapter 1207. The reason was not because they disliked each other, but because of what the main Venerate had said earlier. He had a reason that he absolutely could not give up on Luo Fan's cultivation method. It should be known that the traces left behind by the main Venerate could deduce the runes left behind by a half-saint magic treasure from 1% to 99%. It was easy to imagine how profound the main Venerate's cultivation realm was. However, under such circumstances, the main Venerate could not do what Luo Fan could do easily. He could not control the entire universe like Luo Fan could, and he could not be omnipotent like a saint in the universe. With just a little thought, one should know what the main Venerate was thinking. Regarding Luo Fan's cultivation method, the secrets of his cultivation, and even all of his thoughts, and senses, it was impossible for the true sovereign to give up on them. As for Luo Fan, he would naturally not be stingy if he only wanted his own cultivation method. However, if the main Venerate wanted his foundation to become a saint and wanted him to teach him the path to become a saint, he would have to establish an extremely deep friendship with him. If Luo Fan thought that it was enough to teach him the secret of becoming a saint, he would not be willing to reveal it even if he was beaten to death. It was impossible for Luo Fan to reveal it, but the main Venerate would definitely want to know. There was clearly an irreconcilable conflict between the two. Under such an irreconcilable conflict, unless one of them gave up on their own thoughts and even gave up on their own principles, it would be impossible for them to eliminate this conflict no matter what they said. Clearly, this was the case. An existence like Luo Fan, with a firm Tao heart, would not give up on his own principles. As for the main Venerate, of course, it was even more impossible for him to give up on such a powerful opportunity without exploring it. In this way, a conflict between the two was almost inevitable. No matter how many words were spoken, it wouldn't change much. In the end, the result was inevitable. The only difference might be the speed at which the conflict would occur. It was precisely because he clearly understood this that Luo Fan raised his vigilance to the highest at this time. The head honored one did not make a move at this moment. He raised his head and looked at the huge door behind Luo Fan. Do you know what kind of gate this is? I don't know. Could it be that you do? Although Luo Fan knew the reason for the formation of the gate and where it led to, he really didn't know what kind of gate it was. At the very least, he didn't know what kind of gate it was. Actually, this kind of door has a name in our world. It's called the pseudo-holy door. Zheng Zun lifted his foot and took a light stride. His movement was not any different from that of an ordinary person, but in the blink of an eye, he had crossed a considerable distance and passed by Luo Fan. He appeared next to the huge door, raised his hand, and quietly stroked the huge door as he spoke. Luo Fan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows at the way he walked. However, it was only a slight twitch. Although this method was mysterious, it was no secret to Luo Fan. He didn't even need to be in this universe to be able to do this. Of course, he would not remain unmoved because of this. Although he could achieve such a method, it did not mean that he could give Luo Fan such a strange feeling. In fact, it was a very simple and common thing for him to be unable to interrupt his movements. The fact that he could make Luo Fan feel that he couldn't be interrupted or stopped meant that the way he walked actually contained some mysteries that were beyond Luo Fan's understanding. Otherwise, Luo Fan definitely wouldn't have this feeling of being unable to be stopped. What's the pseudo-holy door? Does this mean that one can become a pseudo-holy door after crossing this door? Luo Fan asked. Of course not. The pseudo-holy door is actually a realm that surpasses the sage-to-be. You guys call this realm the 9 steps, but we call it the pseudo-holy door. How can such a realm be achieved by crossing such a door? Zheng Zun chuckled. Pseudo-holy door? Luo Fan came to a sudden realization after hearing Zheng Zun's explanation. It turned out that the pseudo-holy door was equivalent to a cultivator who had set foot on the 9 steps. In other words, the first step was equivalent to a level 1 pseudo-holy door in the demon realm. The second step was equivalent to a level 2 pseudo-holy door, and the third step was equivalent to a level 3 pseudo-holy door. In this way, those who had set foot on the 9 steps were naturally level 9 pseudo-holy door. It was just a different way of saying it, and it wasn't much different from the realms on Earth or in the universe. Then why is this door called the pseudo-holy door? Luo Fan asked doubtfully. Although he and Zheng Zun would definitely fall out in the end, it didn't stop them from communicating before that happened. For Luo Fan, it was what he wanted to hear more information about the demon realm from Zheng Zun. As for the Zheng Zun, he would be able to find out Luo Fan's cultivation method through this kind of communication. He would know why Luo Fan was able to do things that he couldn't even do now at this realm. This was also what he wanted. In a situation where both sides wanted to communicate, the two naturally hit it off, and there were no obstacles in their communication. Actually, you already knew. Didn't you just refine the source of this pseudo-holy door into your magic treasure? Zheng Zun smiled. Oh, I see. In other words, the reason why this door is called the pseudo-holy door is actually because this door is a fragment of a pseudo-holy treasure. Luo Fan suddenly said. As for Zheng Zun saying that he had fused the fragment into his magic treasure, he didn't feel ashamed at all. He didn't even take out the fragment that might have belonged to Zheng Zun and give it to him. It was as if he didn't know about this at all, and he calmly used the fragment for his own use. Fortunately, it was unknown whether Zheng Zun didn't care about the fragment, or if it was because the fragment was actually not Zheng Zun's. Seeing that Luo Fan had no intention of mentioning the fragment, he didn't mention it either. He just smiled and said, yes. In our world, there are frequent battles between pseudo-holy treasures. The number of pseudo-holy treasures destroyed is also extremely high. Generally speaking, battles that can destroy pseudo-holy treasures will collapse space-time. So a large portion of the fragments after these pseudo-holy treasures are scattered outside of the world, appearing in various space-times. Because pseudo-holy treasures contain infinite mysteries, these fragments will naturally form an inexplicable connection with other fragments after entering a certain world. When this connection is strong to a certain extent, it will naturally form a pseudo-holy door like this. I see. Luo Fan heard this and came to a sudden realization. He understood the source of the appearance of this huge door. After the pseudo-holy treasure that Zheng Zun mentioned was shattered, a large portion would leave the demon realm and enter other worlds. However, just like pouring water into a cup from high place, there would naturally be a lot of water splashing out of the cup due to the impact, but generally speaking, there would be more water left in the cup than splashing out. Therefore, after the pseudo-holy treasure was shattered, the fragments left in the demon realm would definitely be more than the fragments that left the demon realm and entered other worlds. In this way, the connection between the fragments was the strongest. Of course, it was produced between the fragments in the demon realm and the fragments in other spacetimes. When the connection was strong to a certain level, the pseudo-holy door that was produced would, of course, communicate between the spacetime and the demon realm. Based on this, the huge whirlpool in a certain spacetime that Luo Fan saw in the Divine Son's memory was connected to the demon realm, and why it could communicate with the demon realm and spit out so many creatures. The reason was obvious. It was simply because the fragments there were relatively small, and the connection between the fragments was not strong enough to form a pseudo-holy door, which was why it could only form such an abnormal phenomenon. Taoist fellow might have missed out on the level of this pseudo-holy treasure. It must at least reach a certain level to be able to form such a pseudo-holy door. For example, level 9 pseudo-holy treasure or beyond level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. Luo Fan said with a slight smile. There is indeed a requirement for the level. However, it's not that only level 9 pseudo-holy treasure is enough to form a pseudo-holy door. In fact, as long as it's a pseudo-holy treasure of level 7 or 8, it's already qualified. Zheng Zun said with a smile. Then what level is this pseudo-holy treasure? Luo Fan asked with a slight smile. The level of this pseudo-holy treasure is only at the peak of level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. It's still a bit away from surpassing level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. Zheng Zun said with some regret. From this point of view, could it be that Taoist fellow is the owner of this pseudo-holy treasure? Luo Fan asked with a smile. When a main body heard this, he only smiled and didn't answer. He said, if you want to enter our world through this door, the place you appear on the other side will be a battlefield. A battlefield formed by a life and death battle between two level 9 pseudo-holy treasures. Although that battle happened trillions of years ago, there were still powerful shockwaves lingering in the air even now. Although you control this universe, it's impossible for you to bring this universe over. If you appear there, the aftershocks of the battle will completely wipe you out. Is that so? Luo Fan's heart tightened when he heard this. However, he did not panic to the point of giving up on his plan. When he heard that this door was formed by the connection between the fragments, and that the location of the connection was also the location of the other fragment, Luo Fan already had such a guess. He roughly knew that behind the space-time door was that battlefield. However, he did not think that the aftershocks of the battle might still remain until now. After all, this universe had been changed for hundreds of billions of years, and even the universe's century had changed several times. This meant that the pseudo-holy treasure had been shattered at least hundreds of billions of years ago. Under such circumstances, no matter how intense the battle was, the aftershocks of the battle should have dissipated. Now that he heard the words of the Zheng Zun, he realized that he had still underestimated the level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. Thinking about it, this venerable one had appeared in this universe billions of years ago, and the traces left behind were still there. They were still displaying unimaginable power, allowing him to comprehend many unimaginable mysteries. The terrifying battle in which the level 9 pseudo-sage erupted with his strongest power and even shattered the pseudo-sage treasure. How could the aftershocks not remain until now? It was because of this that he did not think that the Zheng Zun was exaggerating to scare him. He did not think that those words were lies. However, even though he knew this, he did not think that he had no chance at all. After all, it was only the aftershocks of a battle that happened hundreds of billions of years ago. No matter how strong it was, it should have weakened by now. Even if he could not resist it directly, he could make some preparations and put up some defenses. there was still a chance that he could resist it. Thank you for your reminder, fellow Taoist. I'll be careful. Luo Fan did not show his worries on the surface. He just smiled and bowed to the Zhongzun. Could it be that fellow Taoist still thinks that you can safely enter our world? The Zhongzun could tell what Luo Fan was thinking when he saw Luo Fan's reaction, and he could not help but laugh. I have to give it a try. Now that things have come to this, if I give up a plan that has been planned for hundreds of thousands of years, just because of your words, I won't have to cultivate anymore. Then I don't need to cultivate anymore, Luo Fan said with a smile. I see. It seems that fellow Taoist Dao heart is really firm. It's a pity that the supreme cultivation technique that fellow Taoist created is going to be lost, the Zhongzun side. Fellow Taoist worries too much. I won't throw away my life. Before entering, I will naturally make a lot of preparations. Luo Fan was on high alert. He knew that this was the final time to reveal the signboard, and his face was full of smiles. His face was full of smiles, but his eyes flashed with a dignified glint. It's always good to make some preparations. How about this, fellow Taoist, gives me the supreme cultivation technique that you created. If nothing happens to fellow Taoist, I will return it to fellow Taoist. If anything happens to fellow Taoist, I will pass it on fellow Taoist's behalf. How about it? The Zhongzun laughed. There's no need to trouble fellow Taoist. The cultivation technique that I created is only a crude one. It doesn't matter if I pass it on or not. Who knows, if I pass it on, it might mislead others. It might be better to cut off the inheritance, Luo Fan said plainly. At this moment, he no longer had any smile on his face. Is that so? I am very interested in such a crude cultivation technique. I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. This pseudo-sage treasure was indeed refined by me. The place of battle is also the place where I fought against my enemies. I believe that with my abilities, it won't be a problem to protect fellow Taoist to safely pass through that area. How about I protect fellow Taoist to safely enter our world, and fellow Taoist impart the supreme cultivation technique that you created to me? The Zhongzun still smiled. AI, Luo Fan sighed. He didn't say anything and only lightly shook his head. It's a pity. My heart is towards the moon, but the moon shines on the ditch. The Zhongzun looked at Luo Fan's determined expression. Although he had already expected this, he still couldn't help but feel helpless. His every word and action was to exert pressure on Luo Fan. He wanted to make Luo Fan surrender in the end and make him believe that without his help, Luo Fan would definitely not be able to enter the demon world safely. However, he didn't expect that Luo Fan would be so determined. It seemed that Luo Fan was hiding some kind of trump card. He wasn't even afraid of the aftermath of the battle between the pseudo-sage level 9 and was completely unaffected by the pressure in his heart. This made him feel a little helpless. At the same time, he was even more interested in Luo Fan's cultivation technique. What kind of trump card was it that made this peak sage to be so confident that he could stay safe in the aftermath of the battle between the pseudo-sage level 9? What would happen if he obtained such a trump card? At the thought of this, he couldn't help but feel an inexplicable excitement. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that there was no way to delay things any longer. He didn't speak anymore and directly raised his hand to slap the Zhongzun. This slap looked extremely ordinary, just like a casual slap from an ordinary person. However, with this slap, the Zhongzun's expression changed slightly. With a wave of his hand, a three-legged round cauldron appeared above his head. With a slight tremble, the entire universe started to shake violently. The surrounding laws and rules completely collapsed in an instant. Along with the collapse of these laws and rules, the countless layers of abyss above, the crystal wall world, and the entire crystal wall system also collapsed. In the blink of an eye, this place that originally belonged to the center of the universe, a place that was not affected even by the cosmic war between the technology camp and the cultivation camp, was completely destroyed, and transformed into a scene that looked like paste. The crystal wall system that originally existed here, which was formed by the numerous crystal wall worlds, completely turned into nothingness. Along with this crystal wall system turning into nothingness, an unimaginably large number of living creatures within the crystal wall system, as well as the last remnants of the supreme divine land, the stubborn power of the technology camp. Amidst this glue-like scene, an incomparably huge door gradually materialized from nothingness, from illusion to reality, and gradually appeared in the midst of the paste. This door was unimaginably huge. Even a star in front of it was like sand in front of an ordinary door. The entire door was extremely stable. Even the intense changes in the surroundings were like seawater to a reef. No matter how intense and violent the changes in the surroundings were, they couldn't affect the door in the slightest. Right in front of this door, a handsome man with a three-legged cauldron hovered quietly in the air above his head. In front of this man, a man who looked like an ordinary person without any abnormal aura raised his hand towards the man with the three-legged round cauldron above his head. Chapter 12:08. The two of them were naturally Luo Fan and the main world Venerate. At that moment, the two of them faced each other. The main world Venerate's expression was extremely calm, while Luo Fan's expression seemed to have come to a sudden realization. So it's a dome, he muttered. In an instant, he sensed that the rune that he had obtained was unimaginably complex and profound. But no matter what, he was still short of almost 1% of its profundities. He was unable to deduce it completely, and that rune that could not be perfected instantly appeared before his eyes. Then, the rune that looked like a mirror suddenly collapsed and transformed. Although it was still the same rune, the entire image had changed from the mirror into a three-legged cauldron. On the other hand, the 1% that was originally missing, which made the rune incomplete, was naturally filled up, making the rune complete and flawless. As the rune was completed, a strange aura enveloped Luo Fan, causing Luo Fan to have an extremely stable and suppressive aura. This was not Luo Fan's aura. He had concealed his aura extremely well and did not reveal even the slightest bit. So how could his aura leak out? This aura was, in fact, the aura of the three-legged cauldron-shaped rune. In other words, it was the aura of the pseudo-sage treasure itself. Facing the changes in Luo Fan's body, the main body's expression couldn't help but slightly change. He said, "I didn't expect you to be able to complete the runes on my magic treasure. This is really beyond my expectations." As he spoke, the faint desire in his eyes became more and more obvious. That was for sure. Luo Fan could actually deduce the missing 1% of his rune so quickly. This was enough to show how outstanding his comprehension was. Since his comprehension ability was so outstanding, then the cultivation technique that he created was likely to be even more exquisite. Naturally, it made him want to obtain it even more. Luo Fan didn't answer the head Venerate's question. He raised his hand and pointed. The rune instantly appeared in front of him. One was very similar to the three-legged cauldron above the main body's head, but it appeared more illusory and smaller. The three-legged round cauldron appeared in front of him, which seemed to be much more exquisite. After all, this three-legged cauldron was just a rune, and it was deduced and completed by Luo Fan himself. Naturally, it couldn't be compared with the real, pseudo-divine treasure. It was already extremely commendable to form such a three-legged cauldron at this level. It was impossible to compare it with the three-legged cauldron. What a pity! This is just a pseudo-sage treasure that you refined a few trillion years ago. Compared to your current magic treasure, it is still far inferior. Luo Fan sighed and raised his hand to pat it lightly. Boundless energy from the entire universe was gathering towards this location. This power was not used to attack the head Venerate, but was completely condensed and poured into the three-legged cauldron in front of him. This three-legged cauldron was originally just an illusory rune, but after receiving so much power, it began to become real at an astonishing speed. However, it started to become real at an astonishing speed, gradually turning from its original illusory appearance into a real three-legged cauldron. The extremely stable aura that suppressed everything became denser and denser. After a while, when the power that was enough to completely destroy a star domain of hundreds of millions of light years was completely condensed in this three-legged cauldron, The three-legged cauldron shuddered and took on a completely substantial form. It became a real artifact. Unfortunately, although that mysterious rune was deduced by Luo Fan based on the pseudo-sage treasure, it was only a rune after all. An artifact condensed from this rune could not directly become a pseudo-sage treasure in a single step. It needed a long period of tempering before it could advance and approach the level of a pseudo-sage treasure step by step. According to Luo Fan's deduction, such a long period of time would take at least trillions of years now. Although this three-legged cauldron exuded such a powerful aura and looked so terrifying in front of Luo Fan, it was only equivalent to a magic artifact. Although this magic artifact might have 1 or 2% of the power of the pseudo-sage treasure, it was still a magic artifact after all. Its essence was still many times inferior to a magic artifact. Luo Fan held the three-legged cauldron and let out a slight sigh. Normally, he might want to set up a space-time array like when he was refining the creation shrine and accelerate the flow of time to an incredible degree, so that this magic artifact could truly become a pseudo-sage treasure or even reach the height of pseudo-sage level 9. The rune used by this magic artifact was the rune of a pseudo-sage level 9 magic artifact. So it naturally had the potential to grow to that height without needing Luo Fan to control it. However, this was obviously not an ordinary time. Now a pseudo-sage level 9, which was a powerful existence who had set foot on the 9th step, was in front of him. If Luo Fan were to arrange that formation again, he would be sending himself to the butcher's knife without any ability to resist. He would definitely be courting death. Luo Fan obviously wouldn't do such a thing. As such, he could only glance at the magic tool with a hint of regret before raising his hand and sending the magic tool toward the main body. The three-legged cauldron was densely covered with countless ancient and strange lines, as if it was outlining the great Tao, and also as if it was outlining all the mysteries of the universe. The suppressive aura it emitted was integrated with the entire universe. It was as if all the changes were supported by the entire universe, and everything that was suppressed by would be suppressed by the entire universe. At this moment, Luo Fan sent the three-legged cauldron to the main body. Of course, it was not to give it to him, but to use the power of the three-legged cauldron to completely suppress the main body. Although the three-legged cauldron was only a magic artifact at this moment, compared to the one condensed above the main body, compared to the phantom of the pseudo-sage treasure, its level was billions of times lower. However, compared to the pseudo-sage treasure, the three-legged cauldron had an advantage. That was the universe. Luo Fan could be almost omnipotent like a saint in this universe. To him, even if the three-legged cauldron was only a magic artifact, under his control and the support of the universe, it could unleash power that far exceeded the level of a magic artifact. It might even be comparable to the pseudo-sage treasure from before. Such a powerful artifact was best used to attack the incarnation or projection of the Venerable One. The main body looked at the three-legged cauldron that emitted a powerful suppressive aura as it flew towards him, and an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. He raised his hand and pointed gently, and the three-legged cauldron above his head instantly flew forward, colliding with the three-legged cauldron that Luo Fan was controlling. Although the three-legged cauldron that the main body controlled was launched later, it seemed to be flying forward normally. However, during this process, Luo Fan felt that the entire universe had been enveloped by the three-legged cauldron, and no matter where he dodged, he could not escape the suppression of the three-legged cauldron. This kind of feeling made him secretly sigh. This is the atmosphere that a person who has stepped on the stairs should have when using a pseudo-sage treasure. Although the power of the three-legged round cauldron is amazing. Although the three-legged cauldron that he was controlling was powerful, it did not have such an effect because its level was not high enough. However, although it was inferior in terms of aura, Luo Fan did not have any intention of giving up. He smiled and raised his hand gently. The three-legged cauldron that he controlled began to spin, and the suppressive aura seemed to have gained the value of the universe. It suddenly skyrocketed 100 times. This suppressive aura was so strong that it had even reached the level of condensing a world of aura in the outside world. The three-legged cauldron seemed to be wrapped in a mysterious world, and it collided with the three-legged cauldron that was controlled by the main body. It looked like a vast and mysterious world was colliding with it. This was because Luo Fan knew that he could not compare to the main body in that kind of aura, so he simply did not care about it, and directly released the power contained in the three-legged cauldron without any scruples. The two three-legged cauldrons collided with each other in an instant. In an instant, the entire universe shook violently, and countless stars began to shake violently as if they were being held by a big hand at this moment. The surroundings, which had gradually calmed down, instantly reappeared in an even more ferocious state. The area it covered was even more exaggerated than before. God knows how many river systems were completely destroyed in the process, turning into a glue-like state. This was a change in breadth and depth. This time, not only were the laws and principles being minced apart, even the void was completely shattered by the impact. Through the grayish, glue-like state, one could even see an incomparably mysterious, abstruse, and mysterious great Tao looming in the depths like a long river. This was nothing else but a scene that would appear when the boundary between the unseen and reality was broken. During this process, the massive gate that led to the demon realm did not change at all. It was completely unaffected by the terrifying changes, and it looked as if the changes in the surroundings were just illusions. Similar to the door were Luo Fan and the true sovereign. They were also extremely calm and composed amidst the grayish state that was like paste. It was as if they were completely separated from the changes in their surroundings and were completely unaffected by the changes in their surroundings. Unfortunately, it's still a little lacking. Luo Fan sighed. He casually waved his hand, and countless tiny fragments gathered in the air, forming a three-legged cauldron that was covered in countless cracks in front of him. When the two three-legged cauldrons collided, the true sovereign's three-legged cauldron had erupted with terrifying power, directly shattering Luo Fan's three-legged cauldron into countless fragments. Although the three-legged round cauldron shadow of the main body had also shattered during this process, it must be known that the main body's three-legged round cauldron was only a shadow, while Luo Fan's three-legged round cauldron was a true magic tool that had been refined. Moreover, it was a magic tool that had received the blessing of the entire universe. In such an outcome that was close to mutual destruction, it was obvious who would emerge victorious and who would lose. At this moment, an invisible arm swept to both sides. The glue-like state within a few light years around the huge door completely calmed down, and the star territory became calm and normal again. It seemed as if nothing unusual had happened here. Then, the true sovereign's figure appeared in front of Luo Fan. He raised his hand and pressed it against the three-legged cauldron. Crack! The cauldron completely collapsed, and it was even to the extent that the profound talisman markings that formed the cauldron completely collapsed along with it. They transformed into countless fine fragments once more before vanishing without a trace in the end. After these changes, Luo Fan finally reacted. He raised his hand and waved it gently. A red light flashed and wrapped around the true sovereign in front of him. Space-time, nomological rules, and even the void around the red light showed signs of melting as the red light appeared. It was as if they were being corroded, a very good light of extinction. It's a pity that you still don't know how strong a true pseudo-sage is. The true sovereign praised and gently tore it with his hands. The red light that could even corrode the void was instantly torn apart by him. The red light, which was originally invisible and intangible, seemed to have turned into countless pieces of rubies, splashing and scattering in all directions. Drop by drop, they disappeared without a trace, but they did not dissipate. Instead, they broke through space-time and went to a random place far away from here. Perhaps there, they would cause extremely terrifying damage. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan's eyes lit up. What happened to him? There were many cultivators who had set foot on the steps, but none of them had ever been able to display the means that the true sovereign had displayed at this moment. For the other cultivators who had set foot on the steps, they mostly relied on their magic treasures, which were the pseudo-sage treasures that the true sovereign had mentioned. They constantly stimulated the power of the magic treasures to achieve their various goals. The power that he had displayed before had the power of extinction. Even the red light that could corrode the unseen world was cast to counter this characteristic of theirs. After all, for cultivators who relied more on magic treasures to fight, their use of the body, no matter what, would be somewhat deficient. This deficiency only applied to cultivators of their level. For cultivators of other levels, it was a deficiency. Their use of the body was certainly superb. However, a deficiency was a deficiency. As long as one targeted the body, one would naturally be able to obtain a stronger advantage than against magic treasures. However, he did not expect that the true sovereign's body had almost the same characteristics as a magic treasure. At that moment, Luo Fan felt that the red light was not torn apart by the hands of the human body, but as if it was completely crushed by the three-legged cauldron. Unity of man and treasure? Luo Fan asked. He raised his hand, and the endless red light in the void formed a three-legged cauldron that suppressed the true sovereign. When the true sovereign heard Luo Fan say that the unity of man and treasure was achieved, his eyes slightly brightened. He said, "You are indeed not simple to actually be able to see this. However, although it is somewhat close, your guess is still wrong." As he spoke, he raised his hand and formed a fist seal, which he blasted towards Luo Fan's face. This attack did not seem to have any abnormalities on the outside, and there were no special changes, but Luo Fan, who was enveloped by this fist seal, felt as if he was being crushed by countless heavens and earth. It was as if when this fist seal imprinted on his body, he would instantly be crushed by countless heavens and earth's power, and not even a trace of matter or power would be left behind. Such a fist imprint was truly terrifying. Even though Luo Fan felt that he had no flaws at all, he still couldn't help but feel fearful. I guess wrong? Then what is the correct one? At this moment, he even had the mind to ask this question. As he spoke, he directly used the three-legged cauldron condensed from the endless red light to appear in front of the true sovereign's fist seal and directly wrapped around the fist seal. The true sovereign's fist seal shook, and countless small cracks instantly appeared on the three-legged cauldron that was formed from the red light. It looked as if it had already been broken once, but had only been pieced back together by someone extremely patient and attentive. The sound's penetrative power was beyond imagination, and could even be heard by star regions that were trillions of light years away in the universe. Such a terrifying sound could only be heard when the world was being destroyed. Moreover, it wasn't just the destruction of a single world, but the instantaneous destruction of hundreds and thousands of worlds. In the end, the three-legged cauldron that was formed from the red light completely collapsed. Compared to before, the ruby-like fragments that were even more condensed and numerous scattered in all directions, directly penetrating through space and time and burrowing into a completely unfamiliar place. However, the true sovereign, who had destroyed the three-legged cauldron, also lost his power in his fist seal. He could only stop in the void and could not smash the fist seal onto Luo Fan's face. You want to know? It's not difficult for me to tell you, as long as you use your own cultivation method to exchange for it, the true sovereign said as he retracted his fist seal. However, he clearly did not think that Luo Fan would agree. As he spoke, he took a light step forward, and his figure was like an ordinary martial arts expert fighting. There were no special flashes of light or any special changes, and his figure had already appeared beside Luo Fan, who had just dodged. He raised his hand to form a palm seal and slammed it towards Luo Fan's chest. Chapter 1209. Facing such a palm print, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. He raised his hand and formed a fist seal to block the incoming palm print. This palm print was completely different from the one that the main Venerate had formed, but it also contained boundless mysteries. This time, the palm print not only received the blessing of the entire universe, but also broke through the unseen and entered the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. It drew down the endless gray existence and formed the power of the palm print, causing the palm print to gradually emit a majestic aura that did not belong to heaven and earth, but could suppress and destroy everything. It even spread out, causing the entire universe to tremble along with the existence of this aura. Although this aura was so powerful that it far surpassed the boundaries of heaven and earth, due to the nature of the aura itself, it did not form a world of aura. Instead, it destroyed and suppressed everything. Wherever it passed, space-time became chaotic, the layers of laws were destroyed, and the unseen world was distorted. Even the great Tao seemed to naturally retreat because of the existence of this palm print. The two palm prints collided at a speed that surpassed the speed of time. Not a single sound was heard. However, at this moment, the layers of laws in the entire universe seemed to become chaotic. Everywhere in the universe, countless stars and planets were instantly destroyed. An indescribable sense of destruction enveloped the entire universe, enveloping the minds of all living beings in the universe, causing all living beings in the universe to feel a sense of despair emanating from the bottom of their hearts. This change was extremely obvious. It was clear that the entire universe could not withstand the impact of the aftermath of their battle. It was plunging into the abyss of destruction. This situation was nothing for the main venerate. He did not show any abnormal emotions or any change in his expression because of this. However, it was different for Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan was not a Buddha who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind, he would not feel sorry for the destruction of the universe. However, one should not forget that at this moment, the reason why he could fight evenly with the main venerate was because of this universe. The reason why he could fight evenly with the main venerate was because of this universe. It was because he could receive the unreserved blessing of the universe, and he could become omnipotent like a supreme saint in the universe. If he lost this universe, he would still be powerful. He would still be countless times stronger than peak quasi-saints. He might even be comparable to pseudo-saints who had set foot on the third or fourth step. However, compared to the projection of the main venerate, who was at least a level 9 pseudo-saint, he would not be able to resist at all. This was because this universe was so important. When he sensed that the universe was about to be destroyed, Luo Fan could not help but feel his heart skip a beat and his expression change slightly. Just the aftermath of the palm imprints that the two of them had sent out earlier had caused the entire universe to fall into the abyss of complete destruction. One could imagine how strong the impact of such a change was. As the two palm prints collided, all kinds of strange lights scattered in all directions. Endless worlds were born, destroyed, born again, and destroyed again. The two of them seemed to be at the center of the universe, sitting and watching the endless worlds around them constantly being born and destroyed. The birth and destruction of these worlds and universes were not absolutely controlled by Luo Fan and the Venerable One. Instead, they were distributed in a very strange way. Sometimes, Luo Fan controlled the birth, and sometimes it was the other way around. Together, they evolved the scene of the birth and destruction of the universe. This scene covered a radius of several dozen light years, directly transforming this area into an extremely strange and wonderful place, forming a wonderful place that could not be described with words. The palm print that Luo Fan and the main venerate had sent out seemed to have obtained true intelligence. They did not need to be controlled by the two of them, and they naturally began to fight instinctively. The transformation between the birth and destruction of the universe was the result of the instinctive battle between the two palm prints. If all kinds of battle wisdom were completely sorted out, it would probably be enough to make any ordinary creature become a god of war. It would be enough to be used as a battle Bible by any world, any heaven, and any universe. After all, Luo Fan had received the support of the entire universe. Although his palm print could not compare to the main venerates in terms of ability, it was still extremely exquisite and mysterious. The combination of the two allowed his palm print to gain the upper hand in the battle. This reflected the scene of the universe. The nature of the universe was gradually changing, and it gradually crushed towards the main Venerate. It was about to crush the main Venerate completely in the universe. The battle between their palm prints was a battle that completely transcended time and space. From the moment they sent out their palms to the moment the outcome was revealed, it happened almost at the same time. When the final result came out, Luo fans' worry about the destruction of the entire universe hadn't even been completely resolved. The outcome was that the universe crashed into the main Venerate in the end. Everything shattered and disappeared without a trace. However, although it seemed like Luo fan had the absolute upper hand, and even the palm print landed on the main Venerate, it did not affect the main Venerate much in the end. It did not even make him spit out a mouthful of blood. It only made his expression change slightly. This was not because the power of Luo fan's palm print was weak. Instead, it was because the main Venerate's palm print had mostly neutralized the power of the palm print. Naturally, it could not affect the main Venerate much since his essence was so high. Although it did not affect him much, it was still a slight advantage. Luo fan took advantage of this opportunity to raise his hand and grab at the void. He reached into the gap between the universe and the state of chaos, and grabbed a large cluster of gray existences that were almost the size of stars. This was the most gray existence that Luo fan had grabbed from the gap between the universe and the state of chaos ever since he found out about the existence of the gap between the universe and the state of chaos. As soon as so many gray existences appeared, they naturally spread throughout the universe. They wanted to assimilate the entire universe into gray existences and destroy it completely. Faced with this, Luo fan raised his hand and directly sent a rune that looked like a three-legged cauldron into the gray existence. This three-legged cauldron was already somewhat different from the rune that he had obtained from the main Venerate. The change was extremely subtle. It was extremely mysterious, but it did not cause the rune's power to increase by a large margin. On the contrary, this change caused the power of the talisman to be greatly reduced. After all, the rune that looked like a three-legged cauldron had been created by the main Venerate after cultivating for God knows how many years. It had already reached an almost perfect state. If he wanted to make it more profound and mysterious, it would take at least tens of thousands of years for Luo fan to achieve it with his cultivation realm. At this moment, he had only obtained a complete rune for such a short period of time. It was naturally impossible for him to truly achieve it. However, even though the power of the rune itself had been reduced by a little because of his changes, such a change was still very effective. However, it wasn't just a simple reduction in power. Because of such a change, this was the compatibility between the rune and the gray existence. It had already increased by tens of thousands of times. This kind of compatibility made it so that if a gray, hazy existence was used to construct this three-legged cauldron, even if it was only a magic tool, it would not be able to withstand it. However, it was still tens of thousands of times more powerful than the three-legged cauldron that Luo fan had constructed in the beginning. Such an increase in strength was obviously enough to change the outcome of the battle. After the three-legged cauldron-like rune entered the grayish existence, it started to absorb the grayish existence like a black hole. In the blink of an eye, all of the grayish existence was sucked into the three-legged cauldron, causing a solid three-legged cauldron to appear in front of Luo fan. As soon as the three-legged cauldron appeared, the aura that could suppress everything swept across the entire universe, directly interrupting the process of a universe that was heading towards the abyss of destruction. It was like a broken mirror that had been completely frozen in amber. When Luo fan sensed this change, he was slightly surprised. This change was beyond his expectations. He had not constructed this three-legged cauldron to suppress the entire universe and stop it from being destroyed, but to suppress his opponents. He had not expected that the aura that the three-legged cauldron emitted would be enough to create such an effect, completely interrupting the process of the entire universe's destruction. Faced with such an unexpected gain, he could only rejoice. What is this? This isn't power, it's not space-time, it's not a law, it's not a law. At that moment, an extremely shocked expression appeared on the patriarch's face. He stood there and looked at the three-legged cauldron that Luo Fan had condensed. His mouth was agape, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. The rune that formed the three-legged round cauldron was something he had created over billions of years of cultivation. He was even more familiar with the three-legged round cauldron than he was with his own body. However, at this moment, he discovered that there was a change in the rune that he could not understand at all. In fact, he couldn't even see through the strange existence that formed this three-legged cauldron. He didn't even know what kind of existence it was. How could he not be shocked and curious about this powerful existence that had become a pseudo-saint countless years ago? I was right to come this time, he murmured, trying his best to explore all the mysteries of the three-legged cauldron. It was a pity that although he was extremely powerful, and this projection alone was enough to make Luo Fan run around for his life, almost destroying the entire universe. However, he did not have his own independent worldview. Without his own independent worldview, it was impossible for him to have the perspective that came with an independent worldview, and it was impossible for him to discover that there was an indescribable gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. Since he couldn't discover the gap, he naturally couldn't know what kind of existence this gray, hazy existence was. Just like a blind man, even if he touched an elephant, he wouldn't know what the elephant really looked like. From his point of view, this grayish existence was something that was completely beyond his senses. Even the chaos that he comprehended during his daily cultivation seemed to only be a part of this existence. The more the main home master sensed and probed this strange change, the more shocked he became. Luo Fan naturally did not care how shocked he was or how he probed. He raised his hand and pointed at the main hall master. As he pointed, the three-legged round cauldron trembled slightly and slowly floated towards the main hall master. That's right, it was not charging or crashing, but floating. The three-legged round cauldron was like a balloon in the water. It seemed to be very difficult for it to stay in the water. Then, under the influence of the violent force, it slowly floated towards the projection of a level 9 pseudo-sage. However, although it seemed to be floating slowly, the speed of the three-legged round cauldron itself, it had reached an unimaginable level. Almost without any time, the three-legged round cauldron had already arrived beside the main home master from afar. Before the main home master could react, it had already collided with him. The main home master suffered such a terrifying collision. There was a hint of helplessness on his face. Then, his entire body shattered like a silhouette made of glass. Countless cracks that looked like spider webs appeared on the surface of his body. Then, all the cracks continued to expand and expand. In the blink of an eye, the powerful main hall master was turned into countless tiny fragments. However, even though he was turned into fragments, he did not collapse immediately. Instead, he seemed to be frozen in midair by a terrifying force, maintaining his original figure. At first glance, he seemed to be exactly the same as before. However, this was not all. After that, the fragments continued to shatter, and each fragment shattered into tens of thousands of pieces. From the original thumb-sized fragments, they continued to shatter into powder, and finally, they shattered into dust. In the end, they completely turned into a faint mist, causing the main hall master, who was frozen in midair by a terrifying force, to seem illusory and real at the same time. It was as if he was condensed from mist. How could it be so easy? Luo Fan frowned and raised his hand. The three-legged round cauldron shook slightly, and the main hall master, who had turned into mist, collapsed and continued to shatter in the void. In the end, he completely disappeared without a trace, not even leaving a trace of mist. At this point, although Luo Fan felt that things were not so simple, under such a fact, he could only think that things were really like this. That's good too. It saved me a lot of trouble. Luo Fan thought to himself. He raised his hand and waved, and the three-legged round cauldron slowly floated towards him. This time, it was truly floating. Its speed was not as mysterious as before, which seemed slow but was actually fast. It took a long time for it to slowly arrive in front of him. This magic artifact is actually so powerful. Why don't I keep it and refine it into a pseudo-sage treasure? Stroking the three-legged round cauldron, Luo Fan thought to himself. After thinking for a while, he smiled slightly. If he had time, he might be able to do this, but he could not rely on it. After all, this three-legged round cauldron was a magic artifact created by the main hallmaster. Although it had been modified by him and was slightly different from the original, it was still fundamentally the same. If it was refined into a pseudo-sage treasure, it might be extremely powerful against other cultivators. But if it encountered the main hallmaster, the result would be extremely tragic. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable palpitation. The expression on his face changed greatly. He directly blasted the three-legged round cauldron into the void above him. That's right, it was a ferocious bombardment. It was no longer the kind of suppression and compression that made it seem as if it was floating. Instead, it was a ferocious bombardment that did not care about anything. Even if it destroyed the entire world and the entire universe, it did not care at all. The effect of this attack was not visible, and there were no changes in the target location. However, the entire universe had already suffered extremely serious consequences because of this. With Luo Fan as the center, the star domain within hundreds of billions of light years was completely destroyed in an instant. The entire process was like a calm pond filled with silt at the bottom, turning muddy because of an earthquake. In the blink of an eye, the space-time within hundreds of billions of light years turned into a paste. Even the laws, as well as the void, completely collapsed at this moment. They were completely destroyed and turned into a part of the gray paste. In the midst of this transformation, countless galaxies, stellar systems, planets, and living beings perished without even feeling a thing. Luo Fan was well aware of this change, but he could no longer care about it at this moment. At this moment, the palpitation in his heart was so intense that he could barely maintain his body's stability. The unprecedented crisis of life and death made him no longer care about anything in the outside world. He only knew to constantly activate the power of the three-legged round cauldron, stimulating the power of the universe, so that the three-legged round cauldron's power could reach the peak that he could control. At this moment, hundreds of kilometers above Luo Fan, where the three-legged round cauldron was facing, space-time suddenly broke. The breaking of the space-time was completely different from the space-time that was destroyed by a powerful force. The destruction of space-time by a powerful force was the complete destruction of space-time and the complete destruction of the balance between space-time and space. At this moment, the breaking of the space-time was like an excessive amount of water being stuffed into a sealed bottle, forcibly breaking the space-time.